I just went live. Let me double check with this and make sure that everything's up. Yeah, we got some people in the chat.
I'll open up the chat, see if I could see the chat if there is any.
Hello, everybody. Welcome. I am joined by the lovely Kunis. He
Yo.
is an awesome producer from London, and he has just released a bunch of music that you've been sitting on for quite a while, right? At least that's the initial impression.
Yeah, for a while.
Yeah, man, that's
For a
awesome.
while.
So, congrats on the release. We're going to be chopping it up today, just having a pretty casual interview. I definitely want to put links and stuff in the description. So, while he's talking, I'm going to be in the background and making sure everybody has access to that because you definitely want to check out these tunes. And Saturate Records is kind of, or I guess Tomas is somebody that I've been having a lot of chats with as well. Super awesome guy. And it's really cool to just have you guys be a part of my establishment. And it's really cool that you guys are open to kind of just exchanging information and having a conversation.
Yeah. No, I love that. Sharing is caring.
Yeah, man. So, I think that I kind of just want to like talk about you and talk about your music for like more than anything. Um, for one, does Kunis have a like the name Kunis? Like, does that mean anything to you, or how did you come up with that?
Uh, yeah, so Kunis is actually part of my surname because my family name's Kunis, and it's from Lithuania. And Kunis itself means body. And I just thought it was like a cool word in itself, and I wanted like a name for my project that was personal, so that I felt like the music I could make could just represent me rather than trying to fit a certain brand or a certain aesthetic.
That's
Um,
badass.
so yeah, I went for Kunis in the end, and I'm very glad I did because obviously I've had my fair share of shitty aliases, but at this point, I'm just happy that I landed on something I'm happy with, and it makes me feel like I want to push the project more than ever before.
So, do you I guess on that note, do you have other projects and stuff under other aliases that are still active, or is this kind of just like
Nah, everything's inactive.
everything's inactive?
Yeah. It's stuff where I released one or two tunes, then I was like, I'm not vibing with the sound or the style. I felt like I was forcing things. It wasn't quite working.
I'm actually glad that you brought that up because, and that was something that I was talking with Tomas about as well, and I'm looking forward to having him on the channel, hopefully pretty soon. But
Oh, sick.
it's really interesting how you start to like when you get really serious about making music and all that, you really start thinking about like your brand and your aesthetic and how the name plays into the kind of music that you make and plays into the kind
Mm.
of kind of vibe that you set. And so I'm kind of curious, like, I mean, aside from you being from the UK and drum and bass being huge there, was there anything specific that drew you towards like drum and bass, especially towards your aesthetic, because it's mostly like pretty minimal, right?
hmm Yeah, so I mean, that's a pretty long story, I'll tell you.
Yeah.
Um, when I started producing, back in 2016, 2017. um, I was firstly all just like extremely inspired by like Flume and whole future bass scene, um, just like understanding basic synthesis, saw waves and whatnot. And then I slowly got into. I discovered like melodic dubstep through future bass,
Hmm.
and that's when I discovered like 1788L and Kid back in the day. Res was up there,
Yeah.
and then eventually I discovered melodic dubstep, which I said, and then dubstep. And then in 2019 was when I graduated or I finished my sort of education in Norway. And then I was like, well, now I need to figure out where I want to go next. And my dad, I'm really thankful. He's very supportive of my music, and always wanted to push me in that direction. So when I said I wanted to study music, he was like, "Dude, you have to go to London to study, or another big city, up to your choice." But obviously, as English is my mother tongue, it made sense for me to go back to England because, long story short, I was born here, but then we moved to Norway when I was a kid,
Hmm.
and now I've come back. So I was like, you know what, let's give it a shot. Let's try London. I wasn't really a guy for big cities at the time, but I wanted to see what I could do if I came here. And
That's
then when I
awesome.
arrived,
Sorry.
sorry, no, I just cut you off.
No, you're good. You're good.
Um, when I arrived here, it didn't take me long to realize that the dubstep that I was introduced to, like the American stuff, Moroder and I don't know, Excision and whatnot, just wasn't really a thing here, and it was all drum and bass. And the reason I was drawn to dubstep in the first place was for like the dancing, the raves, the energy, the communities. Um, and then when I came here and realized that drum and bass basically carried the same weight, it was just a different BPM, but very much similar philosophies around the sort of sound design and the producers who make it. It was just different cultures, but still the same thing in my head.
Yeah.
So therefore, first year of uni here, I started going to drum bass raves. I'd go alone to these things because it was. I mean, I came to a new city. I didn't really have many friends, and I just wanted to experience what I could. So I started going to these raves, and that's when I started getting more and more into drum and bass, and I realized that I just really enjoyed it. And
Mm-hmm.
there are different types of drum and bass. And I remember one of the raves I went to, I joined one of the guy in my class who was also in drum and bass, and he brought a few of his friends, and they all just spent the whole rave just teaching me because they all loved it. So they just spent the rave teaching me like, oh, this is like neuro drum bass, and then a few songs later, it's like, oh, and this is minimal and rollers, and then the next
Yeah.
one is like, oh, this is a bit more jump uppy, and it's just these like subgenres of drum bass, and it got me into the sort of flow of the language and understanding what this was all about. So drum and bass started picking up like as becoming like a really important part of what I wanted to produce. So I spent the next few years trying to make drum and bass, um, which then led me into the whole halftime beats um, scene because I realized that if I just slowed my drums down to basically half the tempo, I could spend a
Yeah.
lot more time doing the sound design and doing more interesting grooves and rhythms, and that sort of snuck me into the halftime route. And when I discovered halftime, it opened up this like this sense of exploration and experimentation that I just loved in life in general. So having like a whole style of music dedicated to that just seemed like it was the right place for me to go. And yeah, since then it was like, you know what, I'm just gonna do exactly what I want. And it's really inspired by drum and bass, but it's obviously still not drum like solid drum and bass.
Yeah, yeah, of course. And that's kind of the thing too, is like even if that's only what somebody releases, it's really hard to believe like that's like artists in general only make a single genre. But
Mm,
I kind of want to backtrack if that's okay on a couple of
of
things,
course, of
just
course.
because you gave me some really interesting thoughts that I want to talk about. I've got three questions for you specifically.
Shoot.
So the first one is I kind of want to talk about your education and how that like it's interesting because in my experience with education, I've been really lucky to be able to talk to people. For one, like you, but talk to people like I've studied under Copycat. I've got Frequent come in on Wednesday. Um,
That's
I've
bad.
got I've had Cage on the channel, I've had Zane on the channel and stuff. But all of my teaching has been through like private lessons and people like them, and also like
Hmm.
teaching myself. But have was there a lot of useful information that you learned at university, especially abroad, or like do you feel like they kind of just taught
Yeah.
you the basics, or like what do you have any takeaways specifically that you got from like actual music school?
So now you're a very touchy subject.
Oh,
Um,
sorry, you don't have to.
as
Yeah,
in,
yeah,
no, as in not from my perspective, but there are lots of mixed opinions on the whole education and especially within like creative fields. Um,
yeah.
first years of uni, when I first arrived here, I would have sworn on my life to be like never ever go into music education. It's just not worth it. Um, because at the time I was looking at it very much like I want to make dubstep or slash drum and bass or whatever, and they weren't teaching us that at all, right?
Right.
They were teaching us how to put up a microphone so you can record a guitar, and then next lesson was what is a saw wave, and then the lesson after that we were learning a bit like a tiny bit about the physics, like the Nyquist theorem and why we render things at 96 kilohertz rather than 41, and then and it was these things that just like in my head I was like I'm just like I already know everything I want to know when it comes to this like basic level of understanding, and I just felt like I was totally wasting away my life. um but then the third year of uni, um it was even less teaching, right? Because it was time for my exit project and my dissertation, and it was basically just figure out what you want. And I wrote my dissertation on like the importance of noise in dance music, just because I wanted to sound nerdy, not because I was genuinely interested. But
Yeah.
it was taken from like something Bunshin said in one of his sample genie lessons, was like how noise is important. So I was like, oh cool, I want to delve into this a bit more.
Yeah.
And I had fun, but I still never found that uni taught me anything. And I was sort of like, it was like there were a lot of extreme new beginners in my class who basically didn't know anything. So more often than not, I spent like after class teaching classmates what this was, what that was, because they just came there with no knowledge. Yo, Davis, yeah, this is live.
Yeah, this is live.
Um, they came there with like absolutely no knowledge, and of course I respect that. So I wasn't gonna blame them for coming to class without any knowledge, because I took a gap year to like learn as much as I could, because I assumed everyone was going to be a professional when they came to this uni,
Right.
which was a big opposite. But then the thing is, what the point I'm trying to make with all of this is that when I was during my third year, I was looking back at it, and I realized that it was actually the most freeing years of my life, because I got a student loan, which was enough to, if I lived on, like, I want to say extreme budget, not extreme budgets, but I was cautious about my money, what I spent on what I did. I mean, most of my time was just in my bedroom anyway, so my outgoings weren't really much.
Right.
So it just gave me 3 years to just make music,
To
right? I had
cultivate.
no other
Yeah.
commitments in life. And because uni was easy, because we were just doing the absolute basics, it meant that I didn't need to spend time after class catching up on class, right? The write-ups that we had to do were just like 1,000 words, 1,500. Rarely was it 2,000 words. And these things, like, if you actually put your mind to it, you can write good write-ups in like 3 days. I mean, obviously my classmates, a lot of them were doing it last minute, and they were still passing, but maybe not flying grades, but they were still passing.
Yeah.
So if you want to, you could spend like 2 days every term, which is every 6 months or 3 months, just
Right.
doing uni work, and the rest of the time you could just chill and make music and sort of have that income because of the student loan. So that is where I suddenly realized that, oh, studying music could be worth it, because you just have this immense freedom that you don't really get anywhere else or any other time in life.
Yeah, it's like you
Um,
purchased a hyperbolic time chamber for 3 years.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. That's dope. And I think that's a
Mm,
really cool perspective because, I think that when, especially out here in the States, because of how expensive education is, when we talk about, like going to universities for stuff, like my experience, I went to Berkeley for one semester. And
mhm.
at the end of it, sorry, I know that I just jumped thoughts. I apologize. But
You're
my professor was like, our end of our finals was to make a tune, and I sent him the tune, and this was back in 2017, and he was like, oh, I could tell you've been doing this for a while, huh? And he was like, well, did you learn anything? And I was like, honestly, I wish that I could have like taken like some kind of exit exam or some kind of thing in order to be able to move
mhm.
on to the more advanced stuff. And he's like, well, we'll consider that in the future, but I wasted thousands of dollars just
Yeah,
doing absolutely nothing. And in my case, I was already making tunes, and I was also doing like Cirque at the time and stuff, and it was like, what the fuck? So you know what I mean? But what I was
yeah,
getting
yeah,
with
yeah.
that was, if you're somebody that needs time or like needs that cultivation, I could see that being totally useful. But I wish that people had that perspective, or that perspective was more well known, so that way it would be more enticing. But I also would want people to look at the education system on how that stuff works and really focus on teaching creativity and concepts, as opposed to all of the academic, this is
Yes.
a sine wave, this is psychoacoustics, and it's all important, but that's all audio engineering.
Yeah. So if I may, I'm actually doing my master's now in music production, and I'm halfway through my course. I finish in August.
A
Um, it's a pretty sick course, and honestly, I chose a different uni, because the uni that I went to last for my bachelor's was also doing master programs,
mm-hmm.
but it was just totally like, I hated that school at the end of it. I was like, these guys, they do not deserve a single cent from me or penny extra.
Yeah.
But then I found a different university, still in London, and while I'm here, the exit project is to write an album rather than write a massive dissertation. So I knew right away that it was going to be a creative topic.
Wow,
And
that's
then
awesome.
the first two modules, the ones that we just finished in January, the first one was called Creative Identity, and then the second one was Innovation in Music Production. So the creative identity was basically we just spent all of the lessons having discussions with each other, talking about concepts and why we do what we do. We were looking into Sophie, and then we were looking into some random electronic acts. Then we started looking into Tom Mitch and just like dissecting why they do what they do and how people brand themselves and how important it is to have a clear view of where you want to go. And it was just helping us build our own our own creative identities,
Yeah,
figuring out who we want to be, because not everyone in my class wants to be an artist, right? A lot
right.
of them wants to be mixing engineers or um, producers for other people, but they still have some creative identity. So these lessons were exactly what you said. It's all about concepts and understanding why you're doing what you're doing rather than learning what a compressor does by exacts and whatnot, because all of that stuff I mean personally I love, but all of that information on YouTube. You go to your YouTube channel, we can learn everything you need to know about all these devices,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
So, and it's for free, but having these discussions with classmates, with a teacher who's asking these interesting questions right directly at you and forcing you to think of answers, and then every 3 weeks we showcase a bit of music and then we have to talk about it and dissect it, and it's actually been a hugely positive experience compared to what my BA was. um, and then the innovations in music production was instead of diving into the creative side, it was or creative identity, it was very much how can we push things further. And this was a module for me that I found, I don't want to say easy, but it was up my alley, because that's what we do here. It's all about exploring new techniques and new concepts and seeing, oh, what happens if I put 5 filters after this and then 20 OTTs and then another amp, right?
Right.
And this is like crazy creativeness in the grand scheme of things. I mean, and in us in bass music, we see this as like, oh, that's how you make bass sounds. But if you look at a big picture of it, there's not many producers who actually go this far and beyond when it comes to sound design. So going into class with this sort of mindset and just understanding it meant that there was so much, especially with the lecturers, to talk about, discussing, like figuring out how we can push sounds further and do crazy shit.
That's
And I
awesome.
found that very fun.
So
But I'm just
that
sad.
Oh, no, no, I'm sorry, bro.
Sorry,
Go ahead. Go ahead. My bad.
I was just gonna phone it. I'm just sad that it had to be that I had to get all the way up to a master's level before this started becoming inspiring, because the whole bachelor's was just the opposite, you know.
Yeah, the bar of entry was so high, but I mean, that's still kind of cool that you found it to be rewarding at the end. And
Hmm.
if I had known earlier, like I guess in my life or whatever, I'm not old or anything, but if I had known earlier that that was waiting for me on the other side, then I definitely would have put the time in, or felt like, or taken that into consideration more seriously, because that's
Hmm.
what everybody wants, right?
Yeah.
I kind of was like, right after Berkeley, I was kind of like, well, I could put a few $1,000s into Berkeley, or I could hit up some of my favorite artists and see if they would be interested in like
Yeah.
teaching me one on one. So I went that route, and that's good, and that comes with pros and cons as well, right? Because I feel like unless if you are very close and sometimes even impersonal with an artist or something, and I'm going to talk with Nolan about this on Wednesday, but unless if you are working very closely together, a lot of times private lessons are aimed at answering very specific questions that you already have, so you
Hmm.
already have to have some kind of direction or list of things that you are aware of in order for
Yeah.
them to be able to teach you. But they can't, because they don't know you as a student and they don't speak your language. They can't really take you from like the very very beginning and cultivate you from the ground up and help you find out what like your
Yeah.
shortcomings are. So there's pros and cons to it, which I see, but I think that's really cool
Definitely.
that you found that kind of fulfillment, but also answered a lot of those like personal existential questions that even for people like me, I haven't been producing much longer than you, but I started in like 2013 and I'm still like, all right, well, what am I about? What is this stuff? You know,
Mm,
where do I want to go? And sometimes I feel like I have it down, and then sometimes I'm like, maybe I want to go somewhere else or whatever.
yeah.
Which leads me to that second question I had. So, drum and bass is your. I know you make lots of things, but most of the music that I've heard from you is drum and bass. But I'm wondering for this particular thing, like, what led you towards the minimalistic or the minimalism within drum and bass? Because obviously, like you said, there's so many facets of it that
Yeah.
you could make anything. But what was it about that aesthetic that you enjoy producing?
So I think that more comes from I started by loving like the heavy shit, right? Because coming from dubstep, I was like, okay, I want a heavy stuff. Whenever I went into like neuro drum bass, I discovered Noisia and Matthews, and then everyone around them. Um, and then over time, I started realizing that, like personally, I really enjoy like technical side of music. So clean mix downs became like a huge thing for me. How I'm discovering like how can I make my music sound or be perceived as like as clean as possible, and I think a mix of that and also sort of realizing that a lot of these heavy sounds or lots of crazy distortion for me they don't feel timeless, right? They sort of date at a certain point where I feel like I've heard enough screeches and enough crazy stuff, and I personally sort of get a bit bored of it.
Mm-hmm.
While as clean and minimalistic production, I always felt always hits and it always just feels good. And then I started discovering like the raw underground scene of in the UK where the drum bass was like shining with just like subtle sine waves with a couple harmonics, and then very simple drums. I just felt like it would just always hit and people would always love it when it goes off. And that sort of inspired me to try and really strip back my production and just pursue this simple, clean bass that was mellow, mixed with simple, organic drums that I then have tried to create and fit into a certain space that work with my basses. Um,
That's crazy because like, um, I guess that leads me to another question of like, do you think that these sounds and stuff aren't timeless because everybody wants to, make the most latest cutting edge technology of sounds, and maybe the minimalism approach is a little bit easier to ingest and revisit? Or I don't know, like what about that aesthetic do you feel like makes something like that dated?
yeah, I don't know. Some part of me, I don't want to use the word cringy, but it's like when I hear the same kinds of distortion and crazy sounds used, like as unique as it sounds each time these come on, I don't find them so unique if you just chucked a sine wave into a couple of trash instances and a couple EQs and another couple trash instances, and then just let that high end like really rip apart the ears. I find I'm honestly not even sure, but it just like breaks away this intimacy. Whereas I'm really interested in that sort of intimacy within the music,
Yeah.
um, making it sound like it's you could be like vibing out with it. One, you could be dancing to it, right? You could be high in your bedroom and still enjoy it, or you could just be out at a clubs and it comes on and you can make a skanky face. Um, I feel like that cleanness, just or like the sort of mellow, minimalistic approach, sort of lets that feeling come through.
Yeah. And there's no right answer, right? Because it's all opinion.
Obviously, I
But
suppose. So yeah.
perhaps maybe, and I'm not putting this label on it or anything, but actually I don't know if Tomas is still in here or not, but he was talking to me about giving me advice actually on some things. Hopefully he doesn't mind that I'm
Hmm.
mentioning this, but he was talking about, like we make music and it's about the music, and being somebody as yourself, and I would like to say at least one day that I'm there as well, of being crazy sound designer and this and that. It's really easy to just make a bunch of stuff that's super technical, and forget about the musicality of it. And
Mm.
it's actually it's really difficult for even me and myself to incorporate, like an entire song about neurobase or an entire song about like just experimental sounds and stuff, because to create something that's very cohesive, like when you take the musicality out of it, meaning like I would say like harmony and melody and stuff,
Uh,
you got to be really meticulous with making it work in such a way to create a compelling track. At least that's my own opinion.
yeah, no, I totally agree.
But
Because
yeah, yeah, go ahead, bro.
uh, I think with melodies and harmonies and chord structures, it's very easy to make decent music with bad sounds. But the
Yeah, yeah.
moment you take away these melodic elements, the things that are basically, I guess, the core of what music has been for most of us for a long time, and try to make a whole song on just
On
one tone, like
texture,
you notice
yeah.
your whole drops just on E, right? And you're like, wait a second, now it's not about how this song has to move forward in a totally different way than what we're used to. You suddenly have to use sounds and movement in your basses to um create the song going forward. But you can't. And that's when my problem comes in, is that I don't want to like, I feel like, cheat and make just like crazy distortion and heavy sounds going boom 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 boom, and then just like use that, because I mean, obviously I love that music as well. It's just not what I want to make.
Right.
um and then, so therefore, I'm like, okay, how can I make these sounds move forward? And it's about these like subtleties and making things move bit by bit.
Yeah, and like I said, like for me, anyways, the more that I focus on trying to create textural music, unless if it's completely, I guess I shouldn't say avant-garde because I've used that around a couple of people and they're like, that's not what that means. But to me, like,
Mm.
let's just say super experimental, to where it's more of an experience as opposed to like this is something that you want to play in front of people, which has its purpose
Mhm.
as well. I still struggle with all that stuff, and I find myself, which was the next question that I was actually going to lead up to, of in the world of halftime and coming back into hip hop roots of like doing less and less like neurobase and stuff, and instead only leaving like small moments of fills or something to open up that cool sound design.
Yeah.
And I'm curious because even for you, right? Like you started with drum and bass and then you found halftime, and for me, I don't know, I'm just a hot mess, so we'll just skip over that. But but regarding coming into that scene, like when I think of drum and bass, I think of neuro sounds, I think of heavy Reese's, and I think of all that stuff. But I think that the real embodiment of it is, I heard Feed Me say this in an interview one time, but it's about the restraint, I believe,
Mm.
that comes into halftime. At least that's what feels like it's taken over, because I don't know if you recall or not, but in like 2013, before halftime became like super swingy and hip hop esque, it was drum step. Um,
Oh,
yeah, it was
I
drum.
wasn't around.
Yeah, it was drum step, and like that was a huge like hot term with like Monster Cat and stuff, and it was, pretty much the same sounds and stuff, and people were really getting into like doing tunes that were half drum and bass, and then they would go into the halftime thing and then like do crazy switch ups and stuff. But
Yeah.
the more halftime that I hear coming out lately, and the more that I talk with, like our friends from Saturate and stuff, the less that I'm actually hearing, the and the more that I'm hearing, like, just like you said, just fat subs and one
Yeah.
distorted tone or something that's more tangible, and the texture is actually other elements. It's still heavy, but it's not, as you say, for one, it's not super screechy, but two, it's I don't know, it's very tasteful, I guess. So the question anyway was, do you feel like that's part of the outdated aspect of it, or what, in your own words, like what do you feel like you take from drum and bass that you incorporate into like halftime beats?
I see. Yeah. So the outdated side, I just feel like obviously, sounds and styles come and go with time, and that's just what happens, and that's the beauty of music, right? We discover things, and then everyone loves it for a few years or even a few months, and then suddenly it's not as cool anymore. And I think with the vast amount of producers who are getting to such high levels in their production skills, right? We're full of the tutorials and whatnot online, right? We can get good so quickly. If you dedicate your life to it for a few years, you'll be pretty good pretty fast. And I think the competition has made that the some of these sort of core sounds and this craziness is suddenly not so crazy anymore, and therefore a lot of this skill has, what you said earlier, has come with that restriction, right? It's showing that you're not just good at making crazy sounds, but you're also good at taking back sounds and just showcasing this little bit of something. I don't know if you know Box Kitty.
Yeah.
But Box Kitty said something to me the other day, and I hadn't thought of it, but it was pretty cool, and it was, you know, it was complimenting my music in a sense where, like, it's so minimal, and it's you're using so few sounds to showcase. What is it? They said showcase good music, or it's good songwriting skills, rather than trying to hide everything in crazy production. Because the moment you add 4 layers of things, and then you've got reverb on it, and all these 4 layers have got highs and mids and lows, and then you've got a few percussion layers, and then you've got this massive snare. When you suddenly mix all of this together, you're able to disguise your song, and it sounds fat, and it sounds big, and it sounds heavy, but that's what it is, right? You sort of forget this songwriting part to it, and this goes back to what we were talking about, this chord progressions and whatnot. Is that so much about music is so much more than just, well,
Sounds.
unless you want it to be, but it's so much more than just this raw emotion of heavy, right? If you're making super heavy dubstep, then it's cool, but then you can even look at dubstep now, right? Is that the songs that are starting to pop off have like really clean snares, heavy kicks, and then suddenly it's just a simple low end going boom, 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 with a cool rhythm, and then some weird plucky lead on top that sounds like clean and small, but it just makes the whole sound big. And I guess that leads into like this contrast element. Like the contrast between clean and the dirty and the heavy makes songs pop, because the song is only as heavy as
the loudest sound.
The loudest sound contrast to the quietest sound, right? Because all the sounds are loud and crazy, then suddenly it sounds large in context with other songs, but if you just listen to it on its own, it's also just a loud song. But the moment you've got a loud sub bass and then just a bit of noise crackling on the top, and then a couple hi-hats, and then this really thought through snare, whenever that snare hits, you go, that's nice. And then it comes back to the sub and it just sounds fat, and then another snare and it's like, that's nice. And it just makes the whole song sound fat. And I think that's what I've taken from drum and bass, is a lot of it is that use of silence and just low end. Because when I go out for these raves, basically the only things you hear are like is like that snare that hits every, that snare always cuts through, and then you've got a sub and just low end that's just always rattling the cages and the amplifiers around the room, and then whatever bass it is. But a lot of the basses, at least for the drum bass that I go out for, is this like rollers minimal side of it, where it's just like boom 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 boom, and it's these like clean sounds, but it still sounds really heavy. And then they've got one folk horn that goes brrr, and everyone in the crowd just loves it, right? Because it's just that one sound in this space of lots of silence and just snares.
Yeah.
So you've got this one sound that's just so fat, but it's not fatter than a lot of the shit you hear in Neuro and whatnot, but it still hits harder because everything around it is so minimal and laid back that it makes it sound so big, and then it just blows people's minds.
Right, and that's kind of what we were talking about a little bit earlier, of having one or two sections of those sound design highlights as opposed to trying to make it the entire tune. And it's, I don't know about you, but it's really hard for me to try to pull off like just a really heavy like neuro bass line or something that's like like some people can do it, but fuck dude, it's very difficult. And if you can do it, like more power to you. But I think that this is a great piece of insight on how to make maybe like sounds that you don't have an imagination for work a little better. is you start to think about replacing them as like, say, instead of it being a neuro base, it's a neurofill, you know, or it's a neuro
Yeah.
effect, or and that extends the kind of sound design processing and stuff, which is kind of where I'm at as well. Of like, it's the neuro aspect of it is the idea about the insane processing and experimentation. But once you understand that process or formula, you can apply that to, you know, any sound.
Mm,
Um,
very much. I would recommend if people want to start trying this stuff out is like play with 808s because 808s sound so nice and just find something like a simple clean 808 and you're not thinking about releasing this tune at this point. You're just trying to experiment with this turnaround basses, right? So you make a bass line that's just 808, so you got a rhythm going, and then you take one 808 out and you
neuro,
add some neuro
yeah,
bass from your mud pie that you've created earlier, and then you
bro.
try and make it fit, and
That's
then suddenly.
No, I'm
um,
so sorry to interrupt you, man, but that's so cool that you brought that up because, and my viewers would know, but I didn't say what you said verbatim, but the concept of writing with 808s in general and starting with 808s is it's really cool to hear you say that as well because
Mm,
it's a clean sub usually, and it takes away all of your problems of how do I write a bass line, because when you do it with just, you know what I mean, with just the most basic, as you say,
mm.
it takes away all of the other elements of having to worry about fitting texture or does this mix against something else or whatever. It's like usually
Yeah,
sitting in its own pocket, and it
yeah,
bounces.
exactly.
Yeah, and it bounces, especially if you have like a pitch
It
bend.
does.
Yeah. 808s, man. That's so cool to hear you say that. I'm so sorry for interrupting you. I thought that was such a cool thing for you to, or a cool moment that
No,
you.
of course. No, I love starting my songs with 808s. It often just because people start with all sorts of elements to get the song going. You can have song starters, or you can start with some loop at the top, or a vocal hook, or some atmosphere. But for me, I find if I just start a song with kick, snare, and an 808, and then I sort of can tweak around these for a while, then eventually I have like a good 8 bars that I'm happy with, and then when I start adding these weird basses, they often just fit because the core structure of the song just works.
Right. And yeah, I think that's how I've had the most success. I've been really fortunate to have you come in on a couple of streams and stuff too. And that's kind of the direction that I've found success with, finding a middle ground, I guess. Um,
Mm,
I personally still,
exactly.
yeah, I still like chase heavy stuff, you know, like Chi and some of the older stuff that Cage has done and whatnot. But I
Mm,
find that even within their stuff, all of the things that you said are still in place of contrast and
yeah.
placement and stuff. So I actually had a question about that. I was wondering if, you know, for myself and for other viewers, if you have any insight about how to how to make your main elements matter in that term of minimalism. Contrast was a great starting point, but I'm wondering if it's just, you know, like, do you, in what ways do you create
Mm,
contrast for one, and what other ways do
yeah.
you try to like make something have its own place? You know, because I hear people say that all the time of like it's about everything having its own space, its own place, but there's
Yeah.
so many ways that you can do that, and I'm kind of curious as like if you have uh, any ideas or just any places to explore for them.
Yeah, yeah. No, I hear you. So there's a couple of things really. Obviously, the two most straightforward is keeping in mind your frequency spectrum and your stereo field, right? These are two powerful tools that often get neglected, especially the stereo field. And when I say stereo field, when you hear people say things pan to the left, pan to the right, it's often misconcepted, for me at least. For the longest time, I assumed that when people say pan things to the left, you end up taking that knob like 30, 40 to the left.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're like, oh, and now it's on the left, but now it just sounds weird because it's just on my left ear. But
Right.
then when I started realizing that by utilizing the stereo field with like seven, I mean, this is Ableton parameters where the 50 is like max. But then if I put like seven to the left, if I put one of my hats seven to the left, and then my open hat six to the right, and then I put a ride two to the left, and then I put my atmosphere two to the right. Right, it's these tiny little adjustments actually open up a lot of space in the mid or in the sort of center of the stereo field, which then allows for um, that main element that you've got in the center to stick out much more, because these other elements are perceived to be much wider than they actually are. So that, which then leads me on that this panning tool is very much a mixing concept rather than a songwriting concept. And I want to say that mixing is actually a really important part, and something that people should think about when they're writing, is that the mix downs are important when it comes to separating your elements / gluing them together. So separating them isn't taking away the frequencies that don't work nicely together, and mixing back together the ones that do work nicely together. And I guess that whole letting your main sound shine is why I like this minimal approach, is because I try to keep my mix downs clean before I even start mixing it. So in a sense where I've got only the elements that I want, and they're all doing a different purpose, right? I don't put elements in that copy each other's jobs, right? Because I've already got something doing that job. So there's no reason for me to have another bass doing that sound or that rhythm, or a kick doing that rhythm the same as the bass, because the bass is already doing that rhythm. But then suddenly, if I feel like the bass needs to have more emphasis doing something, I'll add another kick to help, and with sidechain on, to help emphasize that movement. But making sure that all your elements do what they need to do, and nothing more and nothing less.
That's really good advice, man.
Yeah, I hope that helps.
Yeah, absolutely. And I probably in the future will ask you more about these kinds of things. But it's really interesting because when we talk about mixing in general and stuff, it's like for one the depth of nuance. We want to see some Kunis projects. Some
Maybe I sneak something out.
I did tell him from beforehand that if he wanted to, he could, but he didn't have to produce. I really wanted this to just be a personal thing and talk about, or really just you. I I love music and I love music production, but the person always comes first. And I think that because you're getting out on a release and all that, I think it's really important to talk about like who you are as an artist, as equally as important as you being like, yo, I just put some tunes out, right? Because everybody's an individual, but it's not very often that people go behind that and be like, this is actually how I think about music. This is actually how you know what I mean? This is how I approach it, or this is what I think about when I even start wanting to put sounds together.
Yeah. I can I just say something quickly on that? I think that's a really important thing you mentioned there, because a lot of people um don't want to understand that. And I know for myself, doing these bachelor's and masters in music production, we often get guest lectures where important people come in. And we had a few weeks ago, we had Andrew Schreps actually come to. I don't know if anyone here knows Andrew Schreps, but he's one of the most sort of famous mixing engineers when it comes to sort of more acoustic music. But he came in, and people start asking at the end of it. He's got like a TED Talk kind of thing, and they start asking questions about like, oh, what's your favorite compressor, and what settings did you use for the vocals on this and that tune? And
Yeah.
you're like, nah, that's not what you learn things. You need to ask more. It's much more in the thought processes and
Right. Why do you want to compress something in the first place? Or what are you
yeah,
yeah, like what are you trying to achieve? Or like I
exactly.
don't know. I feel like I wouldn't even ask, like, unless if he's covering something specific regarding that. I feel like I wouldn't even ask something technical because I would always rather have an open-ended question that makes me explore as opposed to a yes or no or a factual.
Mm.
You know what I'm saying?
And I love that. I love that. That's exactly how I am as well.
Yeah,
It's
because it gives you
someone
more.
there
Yeah.
saying, mm. I
Um.
see there's some questions in the chat. If
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
could
Go ahead.
answer
Feel free.
them. Uh, so there's this one curious, doesn't the 808 act as its own bass? I don't usually mix 808s into an existing sub. That's the 808s are providing a mid. Yeah. So obviously an 808 is its own bass at that point, and 808s can be every color and shape and size. We love them all, and just use it as a bass. But eventually, if you don't want your song to be just consistent of 808s and you want to swap them out, basically to try and get 808s that complement the bass that you've made in your mud pie, and you use your mud pies to to emphasize that 808, because all the sounds, they work together, right? And that's where the power of sound design comes in. And that's why personally I'm like not a preset user, because I want every sound that I create to,
Mm-hmm.
I want to know how I create my sounds, so that when I start mixing my sounds or editing them, I can make them fit together, right? I can see that, or I can hear that certain frequencies in my bass are not so present, and my 808 they're pretty present, but this makes them sort of clash when they go back and forth. So therefore I'm able to use sort of my critical listening skills to be like, okay, if I notch out these 808 frequencies, they suddenly work, this 808 suddenly works much better with my bass. And then because I've notched out from the 808 and the bass already didn't have much there, I'm like, okay, cool, I need to add something else in this element or this area, so then I can find some percussion or some vocal loop, or if it's in my low mids, I'll find some other texture that works well as like not a call and response, but something that helps contrast those elements, so that when they come in, like it doesn't, no, every sound doesn't have to fill up the whole frequency spectrum, you know. Some sounds can miss it, and it's this use of silence and letting some of the frequencies feel empty at certain points in the song. When it comes back in, when that bass hits or when that vocal comes in, it will suddenly sound really nice, and the ears will be like, cool, I'm so glad that it sounds, I'm glad I get to hear it like this now, because that sounds really cool. Whereas if you didn't notch out these elements, then when that sound comes in, it's like, oh, I've already heard lots of that frequency, now it doesn't hit as nicely.
Yeah, it's giving. I think it's important to give listeners a break from specific frequencies too, and that's something that I'm learning about. That Cage actually introduced me to conceptually first with just rhythm and about spacing and stuff. But I'm
Mm.
realizing a lot of times too, like when it comes to contrasting sounds, as opposed to just having a wall of contrasting sounds, in order for them to
Yeah.
contrast, they have to have their own space, you know? So like you have to have
Everything
a
just sounds different. It's
yeah, yeah.
weird.
So like having a kick and then the space to like actually hear a clear hat. And I don't want to dive too deep into that rabbit hole because like I think like it's really easy to be like, well, what about layering and all this stuff? It's not necessarily even about that and about like having like a fat layered sound, but more so about what role what role each element is supposed to be playing. And I think the fundamental of that is rhythm. And then from there, you talk about how to like do complementary things that start to add to the vibe, I guess is the best way to describe that.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. So the vibe and the sort of feeling of it, right? What's
Yeah.
going on? Because you don't want, right? If you're eating like a nice bowl of mellow soup, right? You just wanted something simple, and then suddenly in there you just bite into this peppercorn,
Yeah.
right? And it just sort of, that peppercorn just explodes in your mouth. You're like, that's not nice, right? But if someone was to sprinkle a bit or ground some pepper on that soup right before you eat it, and then you eat it, and you're like, this is really nice because that pepper sort of just was balanced nicely in it, right? It's not just this one bang in your face in the middle of it. Yeah, I just thought that quickly
No,
make
no,
sure
that happened to me the other night, man. My partner and I went to Thai food, and I got pineapple fried rice, and it was really good. But like midway through the bite, I just bit right into a chili pepper, and I was just like, "Oh, dog." And I like
exactly, and
spicy
then
food, but it was so much that I was like, it killed my taste palate.
yeah, and then that's not nice, because then the next mouthful, even though it's supposed to be good as the rest of the food, it just suddenly isn't,
Yeah,
because you just had something uncomfortable right before it.
exactly. That's really funny, man. So I guess like in those elements of what you're talking about with vibe and understanding and stuff, I don't necessarily want to pry you on like composition or anything, but more of a creative approach. Like when you start thinking about developing ideas for a tune or you start writing, I'm curious, do you have a specific process that you like to start with, or do you do any kind of planning, or are you like me where I just
Mm.
open up the DAW and then just start sound designing right before I make beats, or I'm curious as to like what that workflow or
Yeah,
process is like.
yeah. I think my process is pretty long, and I'm not sure I'd recommend it, but like the way I work is, um, I find a lot of time to get inspiration. When I finish a project, I usually take a few days off, just try or discover new things. I like back in the day, I loved to watch videos. Like I remember just watching your videos to get inspired, right? Right, just
Oh,
watching
thanks,
any
man.
form of tutorial, anything that was like a good way of sparking inspiration. But nowadays, it's very much. I find the best stuff I write is if I sit down knowing that I've got a few hours ahead of me where I've got nothing I need to do, and I start with sound design. But I actually wanted to talk about um, an approach that I have regarding, like, I want to say it is an extension to mud pies. Um, and it's a way that I find basically my whole Heartless EP was written when I discovered this technique. Um, Maybe it would be a good way for me to explain it now.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so so the idea is it was when I'd been using mud pies for a while, and like I love mud pies, and I think we all do. They're just a great way to be yourself but have fun while making music, and experiment and push yourself out of your weird habits. But then I remember hearing Salvo by Saka, and then he had this remix competition, and I joined a remix competition, and first I was really happy with my beat, but it didn't even get mentioned. But I mean that happens. But then it sort of it pushed me in this new direction of how can I approach music, and what I thought was so cool about it was that he had this like bass line that morphed and evolved over time, but it still sounded cohesive, but it was changing way more than just automation could do. And I was like, how the fuck did he do this? Oh, sorry for my language. Um, so like, okay, let me see how can I recreate this technique? So what I ended up doing was realizing the strength of Ableton. And I'm sure you could definitely do this in Bitwig as well because it can do everything Ableton can do. But it's the whole sort of fading audio clips into each other, and then having a loop set in your audio to a certain bar, but then when you move the playhead, it will sort of keep that same the sort of same 8 bar phrase or 4 bar phrase or however long you've set this loop to, consistent. And I'll explain that a bit in a bit. But basically, what I ended up doing then is that, and this is how I do most of my songs at this point, is that I'll start by making a simple bass line, maybe with 808s, maybe just a sine wave and MIDI, and I'll do drums, and then I'll sit around with these drums and this just the bass line for a while, right, until I feel like it really sits. And when I say a while, I mean anywhere between 2 hours and 2 days, right? It will just
Yeah.
be this, just the bass line and the drums, and I'll be going around it, and I like to get it like at least 8 bars, hopefully 16 bars that I'm pretty happy with just these things. And then once I've got that, then I'll have um, this bass line that has a cool melody or a cool riff or a cool feeling to it, but it's still one static sound. And this is when I start my sound design process. And rather than doing mud pies without musical intent, right? Rather than doing them by just trying to get textures and weird glitches and sounds,
Mm-hmm.
I do them to this MIDI melody that I've written, where I usually start with like a noise base, like a sub white noise and sorry, sorry, sub white noise and distortion. And then I'll go from there and I'll start adding effects, but very slowly, right? This is when this came from time, is that I discovered just doing the sound design very calmly and peacefully, slowly, um, to get lots of different textures over long periods of time, right? And then I'll have this 8 bars looping over and over and over again. And every 8 bars, I will try to sort of alter something slightly, right? Add a
Mm-hmm.
notch, put an LFO, a random LFO onto that notch, but very slow again. Then add a little bit of chorus, just a tiny hint of it. Then add a little bit of distortion and then a bit of convolution reverb, and then back to a few more notches and peaks, and sort of build up this sound over time. And I'll sit here for a long time. Speakers pretty loud, just having fun, zoning out in it. I don't know, a good hour usually goes by of me just doing these 8 bar melody. And then And this is where the fun comes, is that then once I press stop, I've got this long mud pie, but it's this loop of this melody that's gone round and round and round.
Yeah.
And then I'll slice this and fade these slices into each other. And then each of these slices, I'll move that loop starting point around this hour long worth of clip, and it will give me the same note that was originally played there, but with a different texture. And I'll fade these into each other, and therefore the sort of the bass will morph and evolve, but it will still have that original melody that I wrote in the first place.
So if I,
And
sorry, just as a checkpoint, so
yeah,
if I'm understanding correctly, you make a melody bass line that's usually starting from a pretty simple waveform, and then
mm-hmm.
you start recording that and looping that over time, and while you're recording you start to add in your effects and your slow
Yeah,
changes, so that way you're morphing your bass line as you were talking about from before, right?
yeah.
Okay, sweet. Yeah, just making sure that's sorry, just trying to.
No, no, you got it right on, right on.
Cool. Yeah.
And then I'll obviously sort of slice these together, move them around, find out what I like best, and I want the sound to go round, right? And then I can just have these long fades in the audio, because it's all about sounding cool at this point. And then you can do all your classic tricks, and then you can start doing more sound design on now. You can use panning and LFOs, and
Mm-hmm.
you can use the warp functions in Ableton or whatever else Bitwig has, and you can start doing sound design within this, but it will have this melody, because I like, I've recently discovered that I really like having this like melody in my bass lines. Um,
Yeah, it makes it. I think that's one of the most important things to adding emotion to your tunes. I think that rhythm is what captures you. You know, because we
mhm.
naturally all have our we have heartbeats, right? So we're all geared towards
Yeah.
rhythm, but it's the melody that I believe really makes it like kind of sends it home if that's what you're going for. And it could just be,
Mm.
something very simple. It could be, melody doesn't have to necessarily be like, from Bach or some shit. But at the same time, if you've got this really nice groove, and I think that's why like people like Alex Perez and, even Ivy Lab and those guys for their drum and bass stuff has such memorable tunes, is that their rhythms are very easy to follow. And then their melodies and their vibes, I guess, are just really deep. And I think that
Mm.
caters towards a lot of the aspects of minimal drum and bass, and a lot of like what your music is about. And even for the other people that that have like brought your name up and stuff, like that's something that they say that they love about your tunes is your compositions and about how vibey your stuff is.
Mm. Yeah, thanks. Yeah. No, but honestly, I totally agree with that, because a solid drum groove is really important, right? But I don't want to say anyone can make a solid drum groove, but you could copy someone else's drum groove exactly, and then still have a flop of a song because the bass line and melody just don't quite work.
Or you're just pushing
Whereas
F to
just
win, right?
yeah. So yeah, that the melody and the context like that just they really mean a lot. And getting that feeling just right, right? The pockets, getting that melody to work with these drums and the flow of the song. Because yeah, it takes time, and therefore that's why I spend a lot of time with that initial initial stage of actually getting this melody right. Because I know once I press record and start playing with it, I can't go back and move the melody around, or I can, but it just takes much more effort than it's worth. But if I get the MIDI correct to start with, it makes the whole next process so much easier.
Right. And I think that that's also kind of like why sampling is so powerful, right? Because how many times
Mm,
have you or anybody else out there like heard a sample and then been like, oh, it will be so sick if I like threw this kind of beat over it, and then like the bass line already comes, because like you, like that's where our
yeah.
imagination, at least for me anyways, automatically stems or automatically starts to like branch out and hear other things. And
Mm,
there's nothing better than when you lay something down or you have some kind of idea and it motivates you or it encourages or inspires or whatever word you want to use to know what to do next. And
yeah.
that is the funnest part of writing music, when you're like, I already know what I want. I already know, like, it's like getting into that flow state, but not in a flow state of just making choices, but as a means of like having the intention It's oh man, it's wonderful when you can do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, when a song sort of tells you what you need to do next. But what a lot of people don't realize is that rarely happens. I find it rarely happens, right? More often than not, you just gotta throw things at it for so long, um, before things start sticking,
Mm.
and then you're like, okay, cool. Now I've spent 3 hours trying to make a build up, and none of the versions of build ups I've been making have been working. Um, what do I do? And you just feel disheartened. But at the end of it, you know that you just got to keep throwing things at it, and eventually something will be like, oh, actually, this starts to sound cool, and then you add another element, and then oh, this works as well, and then you suddenly got two sections, and that's when it suddenly says, oh, now you need this and this and this. You're like, okay, cool. Now the ball's rolling, and you know where to go.
Yeah, and that's cool that you mention that because when I talk about like composition and stuff too, and like even though I've made classes and like done streams and stuff about like how to finish music, I've only I would say covered like the bare basic of like if nothing is working and you need to finish this project rather than abandon it, like this is like your zero to hero, you know, like fuck
Yeah, yeah.
everything and just let it go. But I am curious on your end because the way like I really appreciate the way that you talk about approaching your projects and stuff. You know, it's like it sounds like whenever you open up and you start something new, like it sounds like there's a large amount of commitment to that. But at what point do you usually get to where you say, okay, this is worth finishing versus like, I don't know, maybe something that you sketch or be like, ah, this is trash. And then, you know, cause I'm sure everybody does it. I still do
Yeah,
it rarely, but I still do it. But
yeah,
yeah,
yeah, of course.
at what point do you
So
get to, yeah.
I'd say a good, I'd say like a good 4 out of 5 songs that I finish, I feel are release worthy. And then a good, I don't, well, okay, how should I put this? I rarely ever get further than an hour into a project before I scrap it. And if I get more than an hour in, I usually finish it. But the thing is that stage between an hour in and finishing it takes a long time. 'Cause I think the way I've sort of approached the whole music production is, um, and this is what I'm going to be doing my final master project on. It's trying to rediscover the human element of music production, where in my eyes, my hypothesis, and this is what I want to do my study on and research, is how the tools that we have that make workflow so quick is what dehumanizes electronic music. And what I mean with this is the fact that it's so easy for us to copy paste and to use presets and to use templates and to loop things. And these things make it really quick for a lot of people to finish projects, and it becomes this huge high demand, um, ceiling for lots of music quickly, whereas I spend weeks on my songs, um, and and it often gets really draining and scary like that, because I'm like, I'm never gonna make it in the industry because I don't make enough content. But I'm also really proud of the things that I do end up finishing, and therefore it's this balance. I need to figure out, what do I actually want, um, and therefore I often will stick at it for so long, knowing that it's all a matter of time before it gets good enough. That's the thing. Because if I'm an hour in and I'm like, this beat's just trash, right? There's no elements here are inspiring me. Then there's no point in continuing. Then
Right.
I just refresh, restart. But then once I'm an hour in and I'm like, this kick is actually sounding nice, but nothing else is, then I start scrapping every element except the kick, and I continue working on that kick and trying to figure out of a snare that works with that kick, and then I try to figure out of a bass line that works with that kick. And I think so half of the beauty with a lot of the music that we make is how just keep the consistency. And me and Vic talk about this, the flesh interface.
Yeah, yeah.
We talk a lot about this, how consistency is so important, where it sort of got to the point where you get to a certain point in producing, it's not about whether this is going to be a good project or not. It's just about how much time are you able to put into it, because if you put enough time into it, it will become a good project. And that's sort of how I look at it, is that if I spend a week doing something, it will probably end up as something I'm happy with. And if halfway through I'm really just not vibing with it, then I just need to sort of mentally force myself to scrap everything that I'm not happy with and keep the things that are still inspiring me, because I still think there's a lot of value to take from those elements that I've spent this much time on, and therefore I don't end up with this many projects. So my project folders don't look that big, because I'm really quick at sort of deleting everything that I don't like and just continuing to work with what I do like. So
Yeah,
rather than making new projects all the time, once I've got one element that I'm happy with, I'll work with that element until it's a finished song, you know. And
yeah.
maybe halfway through I'll remove that element because all the other elements are now even better. But I'm very much of a add and add and add and add, and then remove and remove, remove, add, remove, 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 rather than starting new things all the time.
That takes a lot of awareness to have, to even be like, even at that stage of the production of being like, this is working, this isn't working, this, I like this, I don't like this, and then
Mm,
having that inhibition. I'm afraid, like I feel like when I work with stuff, I'm like, I spent 45 minutes sound designing this shit, and by golly, I'm gonna make it work. But like at the same time, like I totally hear you. It's like, fuck that. That's ego for sure. But I
mm,
think that's really cool to be able to have that awareness and just be like, yeah, this isn't working, so let's just trash it and then try something different.
mm. Yeah, and it's all about finding your way of working. I mean, I know my flatmate, he makes like 3 beats a day, right? And he just works in a flip opposite way of me, because I'll make like 1 beat a week. Um, so and then we both end up with projects that we're happy with and we like. So it's all about just finding out what works for you and what way you like producing. I just
Absolutely.
found out a lot of the time I would get these, after finishing projects, I'd get these mad anxieties, right? I don't feel like finishing, or I don't feel like starting something new, because when I start something new, I used to, it'd be like it just sounds like shit. But
Mm-hmm.
then eventually I started enough projects to realize that every time I do finish something and then I do start something new, I'm still happy with the result of the next track I make as well. And that's what made me realize that if I just continue pushing through all this like hardship and mental blocks, um, I'm still proud of my work at the end of the day. So
Yeah.
why not just continue working at it?
And I'm glad you say that
You know?
too, because sometimes, at least for me, and that's why I try so hard to finish what I start, even if it's just a. I was just talking to Scree while you were chatting, but the intro, main section,
Mm,
outro philosophy of like, even if you hate it, if you have like an 8 bar loop, 16 bar loop, and you put an intro on it and you put an outro on it, at least at the end of the day, you put a stamp on the project and
yeah,
you finish the idea. But sometimes it's about the skills that you acquire from that hardship, as you explain, as opposed to whether or not the end result of the tune is good,
yeah,
because I would say, even it wasn't even until last year that I started doing that, where I was like, man, I'm gonna finish everything that I start, because I would just make 8 bars and then be like, I hate this, I hate this, I hate this, and I was like, fool, fuck, I'm not gonna get any better if I
uh,
don't, if I don't like go to the next step and figure out how to problem solve in that next section, right? Because we all want to write the
yeah,
beat part. At least for me, I always want to make the beat
yeah,
part the most compelling. But if you don't have the other aspects of working on that as composition, then you don't, you know what I mean? Like you're missing
yeah.
almost
No,
75, 50% of the song.
definitely. I definitely recommend finishing the projects, finishing as much as you start, because, or like relative, like maybe not every project, but at least try to finish a lot of your projects, because intros and outros and breakdowns, they all add to your song, and they're all important parts, and they all require, well, experience and skill to write. Right? It's the beat is obviously the main thing, and the drop is what people actually want to listen to. But if you spend 10 years, and I mean this is extreme, if you spend 10 years making drops and never a build up, and then you suddenly decide, okay, now I want to start making intros for my drops, and the intros are just never gonna, like, they're never gonna work, and you're not gonna have this these tools to create different kinds of intros to help with different kinds of drops. And then maybe you'll eventually learn how to make one kind of build up with the kicks that duplicate and get faster and faster, and then 10 rises. But that only works for certain kinds of drops. And then next day you make a different kind of drop, and you're like, well, now I need a whole different type of intro.
Right.
So developing that skill and making intros as well, and realizing that you can have fun with it, because intros and outros are so freeing, especially when you're making bass music. Because firstly, most people are going to skip that part anyway, so whatever you do doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And for the second, you need it there because that's how the songs are built. But then you can end up realizing that you can just experiment. You can you can do the craziest shit, everything that you want to do that doesn't quite sound good in a bass concept, but you can still do these things in an intro because it's not supposed to sound good. It's just supposed to captivate the listener to actually follow through to listen to the drop.
Right. Something is going to happen, or hey, here's a tone, here's a vibe, or here's something. And I really find too that, like, I don't actually, I do know, like, you obviously have to have some amount of a resampling workflow, but one of the best ways to actually practice that, even if you don't know anything about sound design, is to teach yourself how to write intros from a main section, because 9 times out of 10, maybe some people don't, but I would say, at least like for me, I take elements from the main section and I usually do sound design to it and incorporate that as hints of what beat is going to come, or like what the main section is going to be about. So in that sense, you are already like, you're teaching yourself how to sound design, you're teaching yourself how to arrange, you're teaching yourself how to remix your own stuff, essentially. Like, there's so many skills from doing that you would miss if you don't go beyond the 8-bar section.
Exactly. And this is what I think is really cool is, like, this is like a rule, right? And they say learn the rules first before you learn how to break them. And then you can hear producers like Saruda who make these intros that have nothing to do with the drop, and then suddenly the drop comes and it hits so hard, and you're like, wow, what just happened here? But then you listen back to his old stuff, and he would do exactly that as well, right? All his stuff is all about arrangement, understanding that these sounds are helping make you understand that the drop's going to come and hit in a certain way. And it's all such an important part of making these beats work, our intros, because it's a piece of art. Like, what all the sort of famous art of the toilet and whatnot. Right? It's not a piece of art until it's put up on a pedestal and put into an art gallery. Suddenly it's a piece of art. Right? It's the same when it comes to music, right? It's not going to be a fat drop if it's not put into a context where it sounds like a fat drop.
Right.
And that all comes from the intro. So you can end up listening to your drop and you're like, it's not hitting as hard as I want, but maybe the drop's not the problem. Maybe the intro is the problem.
The way that the idea is introduced, right? Or I like to think of it as, like, on its base form, even if it's just a beat that fades in and fades out, every song has a beginning, a middle, and end. Like, everything does. That's like the one thing that music is bound by time, to some extent. So when you're doing that, if you think about like creating chapters, or you think about, it's arrangement, but you think about, like, I'm getting ready to introduce this character, or I'm getting ready to introduce this scene, or this this happening, or this action, this motion, whatever you want to call it. If you have a horror movie and then right at the beginning you show the monster and, like, it's all there and stuff, then, like, through the rest of the movie you're not going to be, like, it's not going to matter, because, like, you already know what it is. You already know what's happening. Like, you already know the creature. You're already familiar with it, and you know everything about it. And it's like, oh, whatever, okay, So, but if you have these moments that build up to that with that tension, and then, like, towards either the middle of the beginning, or the beginning or the middle of the movie itself, then it's like, oh, that's really fucking frightening because there's a big reveal or something, or there's a twist, right? If you give the twist away at the end, like at the beginning of the book, then it's not a twist. It's just like, oh, it's a factor. It's a part of the, it's just a part of the story. So how you lead people up into that, especially, I guess that's synonymous with, like, switch ups and stuff. It becomes extremely important, and it can be simple, but it needs to, like, you need to find a way to introduce your characters. You can't just be like, oh, and Bob here is there, and you know, with no backstory, no nothing. It's just Bob, and Bob has
Mm,
dialogue, and it's like, who the fuck are you?
yeah,
You know?
yeah.
Um,
It's interesting you say switches because I find myself I write on a lot of switches nowadays. I find most beats that I make, um, I'm enjoying the switches. The two remixes that I put out for Saturate recently, they both have switches, um, and I think switches are a lot of fun. But what you need to keep in mind is back to what we were talking about earlier. Is all this contrast thing is like people good switches don't tend to be similar to the first one. You know, like it's supposed to be a switch where it flips everything, and then this switch either sounds even heavier because it's the first half was quite soft or mellow, or but more often than not, sorry, um, it's the opposite where the first half of the drop is heavy and whatnot, and then you've got the switch and it goes into this sort of mellow, laid back section, which then sounds even more mellow and laid back and nice to what you're trying to get because um, the drop that you've had first was heavy and there's this contrast. And I think this again leads up to just understanding your intro theory, right? Understanding what an intro needs to do to the drop hits, because then you end up using your drop as the intro for the second drop.
right. That's something that Saruta
Right?
does a lot, and that's something
Yeah,
that I love about like Cheese music and stuff is like it's almost like he's got these micro switch ups that have like you could also make that synonymous with the call and response, but it's almost like he makes a whole section a response, you know, because it's like
yeah, yeah,
boom,
yeah,
boom, 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 and then he switches the snare and it's like do do do,
yeah.
and then it
Exactly,
switches back
exactly,
and it's like
exactly.
ah. It's so yeah, it's so compelling in that way,
Yeah.
but that's neither here nor there. But yeah, man, I guess I'm kind of
Um,
curious as well if there's anything that you are exploring right now, whether it be through sound or through composition or through you know, just as a means of like improving, I guess would be the best way to say that.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So I did see there was Scar actually put a question in the chat earlier, and I saw you answered it, but I just wanted to hint on it real quick
Yeah, for
before I go
sure.
further. And he says there's also that sort of mental issue of not knowing whether the result is going to be good or not, but you still continue anyway just to see. And I think that's a really I'm glad you asked that because I think so a lot of people do talk about the mental side of music production, but then I still don't think it gets enough emphasis. And I think anyone who's actually passionate about it will know that there have been days where it's been really hard, you know, days where you're
Yeah,
wondering why the fuck am I doing this anymore? Why am I here?
my poor partner
And
listening to me bitch.
yeah, exactly. So some of us, well, some of you are lucky enough to have partners.
Right.
Some of us actually start alone in our bedrooms. Um, but then you get to that point, and I think that just comes with doing it enough. You just gotta push through and realize, and that's sort of what I was saying about how I found my workflow is very much just continue, 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 and it's consistency of just actually working because more often than not, once you start knowing your skill sets and a couple years in, right, and you're realizing that tutorials aren't giving you the inspiration they were anymore, listening to a song or two and being inspired by that isn't really helping anymore, then you suddenly realize that you need to find this inspiration from the inside, and that's when it starts getting really difficult. But then knowing that you can just continue working at it and trusting and believing in yourself that if you put the hours in, and these hours are X, right?
Yeah.
You don't know how many hours it will be, but it could be two, or it could be 10, or it could be 30. But you knowing that if you stay consistent to actually working, eventually it will sound cool,
I think
right?
that
And being
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I think on that note too, it's also important to like accept failure, quote unquote.
yes,
But when you fail, fail with intent,
yeah,
because that is something that is going to help you figure out how to navigate through what it is that you're doing. Because at least if you are not just like swimming around, you know, and just being like, well, I'm going to put these hours in, but I've got no idea what I'm doing, and I hope that I find it. But if you really take the time to actually sit with yourself, as you say, and be like, well, what do I want? What do I want to
Mm.
express? What does that look like? And you have to go beyond, well, I want to do noisy bass and make drum and bass like that. It has to be, what kind of stories do you want to tell, or what is it about these things that you enjoy that become meaningful to you? It gives you the aspect of working on something to improve, because no longer are you just you know what I mean, just making shit for the fuck of it, which there's nothing wrong with
Yeah.
that. But as a means of like improving, you are starting to fail with intent of being like, well, I didn't get closer to I didn't get what I wanted today, but I think tomorrow I've got something to work on. Or I think the next time I
Hmm.
open a project, I'm going to try to improve on this specific aspect. And
Yeah.
that helps put you on a path for like development, which I guess I could have just summarized with like having goals. But
Hmm.
I do believe that if you can do that, it makes it so much easier. And that's how I found people like you. I'm like, I don't know what to do, but I know I want to get better at the music that I like, and I can't figure it out for myself. So I go and search out those people that are good at it and be like, hey,
Hmm.
how do I get better
Yeah.
at this
Come out and
shit?
hang out and saturate.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it is cool. And then obviously, like you said, fail with intent and find your own ways of how you want to deal with this failure. Because like I said, some people end up making a new beat, right? Just a new project. And for me, it was like, well, I'm gonna fail. I'm gonna say like I've worked 2 hours on this bass and it's still not sounding cool. You know what? Delete. And I'm gonna continue using these drums because I like them. Um, and you just find out what works for you and what doesn't. But don't be afraid to take a step back. Yeah,
Yeah.
because you
And
end up
and
taking a step forward in the long run.
and I believe simplifying as well. I should definitely take my own
100.
advice sometimes, but sometimes if you
Yeah,
just simplify, like how many elements do you need in order to make a track, right? You need,
yeah,
or let's say a beat, because that's kind of, we're all in the realm of electronic music, but how
yeah,
many elements
yeah.
do you need? You need something that provides as the downbeat, doesn't even have to be a kick, and then you need something
Mm,
that's rhythmic. And if you have a melody or a chord or something, then like you did it. Yay. Now make that sound
yeah,
good, right?
yeah,
I get so in my head. I cannot tell you how much fucking time I spend on snares at an embarrassing level, which I'm sure you hopefully have gotten
yeah.
past, but I'm sure that still.
No, no, no. I love the snare game, right? Like, the snare game is like my favorite thing.
Yeah,
So like, as an Easter egg, if anyone wants to try and figure out, is like try and listen how many different snares there are in my Displeasure Shut Up remix. You're gonna listen to that afterwards. You can try and count them, and I'll be impressed if you find them all.
next time you come
But
back on, we just talk about snares.
yeah, yeah.
That'd be pretty
Honestly,
funny.
snares are such a beautiful thing to talk about.
They
Um,
are. That is like one of the biggest epitomes of like the modern electronic artist struggle, though, unfortunately. But um, yeah, I am curious. Was there anything that you actually wanted to like, and don't feel pressured or anything, but just as a matter of like, just moving forward, was there anything that you
yeah.
actually wanted to show us, or did you just want to continue to chat, or did you want to take questions, or um,
Um, well, I'm pretty open. I remember you asked a question about what I'm trying to like get better at the moment.
yeah, yeah,
Um, and I'm personally, I think talking about the intro game, um, I'm trying to upgrade my intros a bit because I'm personally trying to slide away a bit from that, adding elements from the drop into my intros and then using risers. I don't know. I used to be mad at like the death step side of dubstep with like Copendorum
mm-hmm.
back in the day when he went by Copendorum, not Inhuman. And he had these build-ups for his songs that basically just ended in silence, right? It wasn't build-ups, it was build-downs before the drop. And I thought that was such a fascinating tool. And I've tried to use that in my Heartless EP quite a lot. So you can hear that all my build-ups are pretty non-existent. Um, but then I'm realizing now, instead of using that silence, I then discovered Saruda's album or EP Fubar a
Yeah,
few
that
years
one was
ago,
great.
and it blew my mind with how the whole idea of he has this way of building his build-ups in a way where it sounds so messy, but like pleasingly messy, and then when it drops, it's so like in the center, dirty but clean, and it's this massive contrast between this build up and the drop, and it makes a drop so hard and heavy, and it's something that I'm trying to work on at the moment, to push this new direction. So my intro game is definitely something I'm working on, and also basses. I can never get enough of learning how to make new basses and
I know, right?
push that side of things. Yeah.
My channel's called Alckemy Neuro, you know. And perhaps I shot myself in the foot, but the truth of the matter is that like I still love the idea of just making really fucking twisted basses, and it's like a bug. And you know, I'll learn one small thing and be like, oh. A great example of that is I subscribed to Noise's Patreon for a bit, and he's got this video on harmonics and like building basses around that, and I was just like, shit. So, you know, I spent the last 2 weeks just, you know, trying to make harmonic style basses and stuff, and like understanding the relationship between those and whatnot. And it's actually something that Cage told me about, but I think that I didn't understand quite because it was just a conversation like this.
Yeah, I don't know if I quite get
So
that concept of
so like it's pretty fascinating, and I would recommend everybody go check that video out, but I'll try to summarize it. But basically harmonics are synonymous with almost like creating chords with a single waveform, right? Because like the second harmonic is an octave, the third harmonic is an octave with the fifth, and then like each harmonic all the way up to like I would say like the 15th, 16th, 20th maybe, all have technically like a chord relationship with the fundamental. And so so when you build stuff like that and you just use a sine wave and just a single harmonic, and then you distort that, and then you process that, you add your filter, like you have to distort it first, but you process your filtering with that kind of stuff, you end up getting those crazy tonal things that make it sound like it's a completely different pitch, but the fundamental is still the root note. And then you get into like detuning and stuff, and it's just like, oh my god, bro. And so yeah,
I
it's
like that. I'll try and make a bass for that.
yeah.
Next.
I'll spend some time with you later, or catch you on the Saturate the Saturate Discord. Which by the way, everybody, Kunis is on there a lot, and Flesh, who I also really enjoy hanging out with. You guys are there pretty often, just chilling, and it's a great place to come and learn and to hang out with Kunis and them.
There's a bunch of people that like hanging out there sometimes. We often just chill. Sometimes the conversation's quiet, but everyone's just doing their own thing, and every time something cool happens, we're all there to
yeah, like sometimes multiple people are producing at once and like just working on stuff. But that's one thing that I love about Saturate. That's one thing I really appreciated about getting in finding Cage, Aiden, because that's where this all started. That's how I found you all. That's how I met Zane. I really just hit up Aiden for lessons, and he was really open-minded about it, showed me, and he's an amazing teacher. Really kind of taught me all the stuff that I wanted to know about this genre outside of bass design. And he was like, yeah, come to the, you know, Saturate record stuff and this and that. And then I met Zane, and Zane came on the channel, and then, you know, I met you, I met Flesh, I met Box, and all those guys. But I just really appreciate that, like, we understand that we're all just producing, and we all really just love heavy sounds and experimentation. And that's why I am always open to have you guys be a part of my community, because like we're kind of all on the same page. At least I feel that way.
No, I'm super grateful for being here.
So dude, thank you so much, and thank you all, everybody, for being here as well. So if we can, I kind of want to circle back to your EP before we maybe talk about either we could wrap things up or see what you want to do after this. But and I'm on no time frame, but I'm curious as to like what went into this EP, and how did you want this is kind of a funny question, but how did you want your audience to receive it?
Yeah, that's a good question. So as I said, I've been producing, I mean, I feel like I've been producing for a long time, but relatively it's maybe not even been that long, for like 5 years. And I started writing Heartless 2 years ago. and Heartless, the title track, was the first of the four that I wrote. Um, and it was after I had been through this whole phase that I started off by saying, like, I've been into so many different genres. I've tried making future bass, I've tried to make melodic dubstep, I've tried to make psytrance, I've tried to make hardstyle, I've tried like a shit ton of drum and bass, um, and after like going through so many genres, I realized that there were things I loved about all of them, but also restrictions about them all that I really didn't like. Um, and I knew that if I was to produce, I wanted to be able to produce what I like just solely from myself,
Yeah.
without it being a certain genre, a certain restrictions that are made from communities. Um, because I felt like I want electronic music to be more than just something people dance to. I think electronic music can be so much more. It can be music that people just enjoy to listen to,
Mm-hmm.
and experience and can appreciate for other things. And that's when I sort of got onto the idea of making my own music and trying to see what would happen if I just did me. Um, and this was after a lot of those sort of mental blocks where I was just not finding the creative energy to make things, because trying to make another drum and bass tune and another drum and bass tune. I'm like, cool, but is it really what I want to do? And then I wrote Heartless, and this was like one of the first times where I just tried to rip away from all genre restrictions and just create what I wanted. And I was still doing somewhat hard. This was Heartless. The title track is still pretty like, it's written 172. It's basically halftime, but in my head I was trying to rip away from that, and I had so much fun making it. And it was exactly what I felt like I was meant to do. It was the first time where I just took my skill set from everything I had learned and just pumped it into my own music. Because like what I was saying, up until this point, I tried to copy artists, right? I heard Imanu, I was like, I want to try and make a track like Imanu, and then I had heard Copandorum, and I was like, I want to make a song like Copandorum, and then I know, so
Yeah.
I was like, okay, I'm gonna not be inspired by artists. I'm just gonna do what I want, and that's when I wrote Heartless. Loved it. And I was like, cool, I'm gonna try and continue this. So then I continued making songs for the next while, and that's when I wrote the three other tunes, a certain kind of envy, qualifications, and neutron. Um, and then when I've written them, I was like, they all seem to just work as like a body of work. I sat on them for a long time, not sure what to do with them, because, like I said, they felt like a body of work to me, but they were all pretty, as a body of work. They're not in any specific genre because the BPMs are all over the place, um, and the sort of sounds are all over the place as well.
Mm-hmm.
They've got switch ups that are a bit unique, so I didn't think anyone would want to sign them either. But then eventually last summer, um, I sort of ripped off the band-aid, being like, you know what, I'm just gonna pitch it and see what happens. A few days later, Thomas reached out to me, being like, hey, I love all of them. Can I sign them? I'm like, well, of course.
That's awesome, man.
And then that's when I sort of got into the Saturate circle. Um, and then I was like, yeah, this is exactly what I want to do. And at the moment, I'm working on a big body of work. Mainly, well, for two reasons. One, I wanted to make a big body of work to start with, but also because mentioned earlier that my final project for uni is they wanted a full body of work.
Yeah.
And I was like, this is my perfect opportunity. So Heartless is like me just testing the waters. Like it's 2 years ago, my production, it's leveled up since then, but still, I'm still so proud of what Heartless represents. Um, but I want my next big project to be that, just better, bigger and more. Because I get a bit annoyed when I listen through it and it only takes like 9 minutes to listen through the whole four songs. I'm like, well, it could have been longer.
Yeah, but I don't know, man. Like it's a lot different between somebody wanting it to be like lengthy and then somebody wanting to go back and re-listen to it. You know what I mean? And that's something
Yeah,
that I love about beat tapes. And like I have this little side project that I'm doing of just neuro beat tapes. Very simple
oh,
arrangements,
cool.
but just, you know what I mean? Just like J Dilla slash
Yeah,
Madlib style
yeah,
beats or whatever,
yeah, exactly.
that are like, you know, a minute 45 long or something. But you know,
Yeah.
but when you create something that's so compelling, and because you make something that is minimal but still technical, like a lot of times when you go back and listen to it, or you listen to it in a different context or something, it becomes even more memorable, as opposed to like,
Mm.
I don't know about you, but like I don't actually even make, you know I try not to make songs longer than 3 minutes. 2 minutes and 30 seconds is kind of the goal for me, because
Yeah.
how, like, what are the chances that somebody is going to get through that anyways, or listen to your intro, or get through the bridge, or get through the outro, or this and that? And there definitely have they definitely have use cases, and I do think that they're important, especially when you're trying to like write a song, or write about something. But in terms of the adjustment, I would rather give somebody something that they want to put on repeat rather than something that they would want to skip.
Yes, exactly. And for the longest time, I had the philosophy of never more than one drop, or if there are two drops, they're supposed to be switches.
Right.
Um, and I think actually no, I say that for the longest time. I still have that mentality.
Same.
I, I'm not a fan of double drop songs, and I think it's this. I don't want to get into social constructs, but I think it's a social construct that um, how we sort of get forced to make two drops, and the amount of time people are like, oh, I don't want to make my second drop, I have to, so they end up just making like a fake out, and then they've got the same drop again, or they add an extra layer of hi-hats to make it sound more intense. But at the end of it, I'm like, I could have enjoyed this song. You could have just made the first drop one drop longer, like 32 bars extra, and
Exactly.
then just I made an outro, and it would have been really nice, and it would have meant that you could have just repeat listen to the song if you actually genuinely like it that much.
Right. And or you could have like made that second drop like a different song. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
but
yeah.
I so like my thing is I guess like just in my own personal philosophy of like why I contrast and stuff is like for the longest time I actually avoided making dance music, quote unquote, and I still don't care to like make people want to dance.
Same
But
same philosophy I have.
at the same time, I do like tricking, I do flips and stuff, and I like playing tunes that are like beats and bops and stuff at the gym, which it's
Hmm.
similar but not quite the same. So I've got some friends that are from MJ1, and I remember like several of them walking up to me. They're like, "Man, your beats are so cool, but they take so fucking long to get to the main idea." And I was like, "You know what? Okay, I hear you." So it's always been my challenge to just like get to the fucking point of the main idea and let it bang out, and then let it kind of release. And that's been really fun because it's not even just about like dancing, it's about really understanding somebody who knows about dancing, somebody who knows about movement, and somebody who has a different
Yeah,
natural rhythm to where they can't catch all the beats that you would want them to. And what I mean
yeah.
by that is like we do tricks and flips and stuff where like let's say you land on one foot and swing into another or something, but there's a
Mhm.
natural human rhythm that you cannot, you know you're a lot of times in the air or on 1 or 2 feet, and so the way that they move to these beats is a much different experience than somebody just, you know what I mean, bouncing up and down or head bobbing. And it's a really interesting
Yeah.
dynamic to like to look at that relationship.
Mm. I feel you. I definitely get that. I mean, I would love. I I think my audience per se is very much other producers. Um, I love it when people listen to my music and they want to talk about production in general with me afterwards, because I could talk about production for hours. It's something I live for, and I just love. So I'm not out there to get the mainstream dance floor audience to like my music. I'd much rather have a smaller fan base of people who are genuinely into production and I can appreciate the different textures and sounds and the different kinds of the mix downs that I provide in my music. Um, and then on the flip side, I would also just love it if like dance crews would pick up my music, the actual proper dancers, like do weird movements and shit to it, Instagram
Yeah.
reels. Like I think that stuff's so cool. Um, but it's more intricate dancing, and it's about getting that balance. But I then again, I don't make music with that in mind. I just hope that will happen, and it's not that I don't want people to dance to my music. It's just that's just an extra benefit if it does happen. Um, yeah.
Yeah, it's well, if you want, I'll like, well, I think I asked you. I was like, "Do you have an Instagram?" And I don't know if you got on that one yet or not,
Oh yeah, no,
but
I can
make
put it in the
one,
chat.
and you know, I'll show you all my friends and stuff and all that, because it's all just cross promo and stuff too, right? But that's really
Yeah,
what I would like to see as well, is like putting it into the hands of somebody who's not a producer. Um, because I'm like you, like a lot of times when I'm trying to make my latest and greatest tunes or something, when it comes to actual just production value, like I'm trying to impress people like you or people like Tomas or people like
mm,
Zane and Cage and all that, because if they're like, this is good, then I'm like, fuck yeah, I did it. You
yeah,
know.
exactly. That's how I feel as well.
um
Mm,
but what's it called, but aside from that, any other time that I'm trying to do that stuff, it really puts a perspective on how people feel about it and what they perceive and what they hear. And I'm really lucky. My partner, she's a classically trained composer. She has a deep appreciation for like our kind of music, but her ear and what she gets from these beats and stuff are so different than, say, somebody who's just, you know, like a halftime
I
enthusiast,
see.
or somebody that's a, you
Yeah,
know, a drum and bass head or something.
I see. I could end up talking about this as well for hours, but it's like this whole. This is something that opened my mind at uni actually during this creative identity module that I was talking about earlier.
Mm-hmm.
But then since then, I've had a few conversations with close friends about it, and it sort of never ceases to amaze me. But it's this whole idea of realities and how different people's realities are different, and therefore our perceptions of certain situations will be so different. And as like basically your reality is very different than your partner's just because you've got different histories, right? She's got a classical musical upbringing, whereas you maybe don't, and therefore when you listen to X piece of music, then you both will perceive it so differently just because of your backgrounds are different. um
Yeah. Yo,
and
do you play games? Just as a quick side note.
like video games, yeah,
Yeah.
but only League of Legends for the past like 5 years.
Okay, only League. All right. So there's a game called Metroid, which some people have, some people haven't heard of. But even though this is like the most awkward and like you would think that this is the worst time to say this, but I played this game Metroid Other M, and it was one of the worst games that had come out for that series. But in that, there was some dialogue where the main character said, "Our consciousness is bound by our experiences." And that was
Oh
something
yeah,
that I took with me even until today. And I was like, that's some really cool, like that's a really cool concept. And I think that coincides with what you're saying, right? Because
yeah,
you can only think, you can only imagine based off of what your conscious and your subconsciousness allows.
yeah,
And from that,
exactly,
yeah, from that exposition or something that you've had bringing up your past, like that's your reality that you bring into that experience. And
yeah,
even then, you know, two people experience something at the same time, the stories that they tell, even though the events were the exact same, are often extremely different.
yeah.
um, but
And
that's
that's
super
just a
cool.
wild thing. And then that you can try and like integrate this into your music, trying to you can try all you want to adapt to a certain kind of person, but without understanding, if you aren't, see, I don't like using the term normal person and a not normal person, but I guess if we can just say sort of a majority, like an average a floor of dance people who are just dancing to a drum bass night out, if you're not on the same wavelength, if you have a different upbringing than most of these people, and the music that you listen to and like making is different than all of these, there's just not really much way that you're going to be able to create music that's going to resonate with all these people in the same way. And therefore, I think that it's nice to just continue doing exactly what you want to do and find your own path and discover what you want to do, because the amount of times I've tried knowing that I have the skill set to make the sort of box standard club drum and bass, it doesn't mean that if I make it, it would sound good, or even that I would have the mental to see it through on a consistent basis,
Right.
because it's just not, at the end of the day, it's not what I enjoy. And in the music that I do enjoy is what is weird for most people, but
And it's also,
it makes, yeah,
yeah, yeah. And like, just because, which I will fight myself to the day of this, even though like I'm gonna say it and I'm gonna be hella hypocritical, but like you don't have to make the main, like you don't have to make the music that you listen to all the time. You know,
Mm,
like I,
yeah,
the majority of my music ingestion these days is hip hop and well, halftime and hip hop and anything that's kind of like swingy drunk beats and stuff. But like you don't have, like I don't have to make that stuff, even though I have a high amount of appreciation for it. Because like you said, even if
yeah,
you do have the technical skill, it doesn't always mean that um, it doesn't always mean that that's you.
yeah,
There's a difference between
yeah,
doing
very
and
much.
being, right? And it's a amazing journey if you look at it like that. But looking at how you can take each project beyond genre, but just each project and say, well, how can I be this project as opposed to how can I do this project?
Yeah, exactly. There's a I can look through my playlist and there's very little bass music, but a lot of, well, yeah, actually, there's very little bass music and a bit of Vector here and there because his sound just resonates with me a lot. But
Yeah.
a lot of it's some form of rap or sort of emo beats, you know, like Bones and whatnot. And I think that resonates back into my music, the stuff that I end up making. But yeah, I like just being able to make what comes out of me and listening to what I listen to and mixing the two when I can. But
Do you have any rituals or like pre things that you do to and not even necessarily before you produce, but just in general to like center yourself and to recalibrate, like this is gonna sound, you know, like spiritual and shit, but like
yeah,
recalibrating
mm,
you and your soul?
I get what you're saying. There's a there's a couple of things that I stand by and I say I like the core to my being able to do what I do. One of the things is diet. I'm a huge fan of cooking and making good food for myself. Um, and I don't think I'd be anywhere where I am now without that because just having that consistency of solid food has just given me the energy to always do what I want to do. And I find that the weeks or even months where I end up slacking on my own cooking um, are weeks and months where I end up making not much music slash bad music and stuff that I'm just not happy with, or finding it really hard to stay motivated, or find that motivation to start projects, or yeah, giving myself too many excuses. So yeah, cooking is my way of meditating.
Yeah, that's awesome. I try to, what other, I mean, tricking has become very goal oriented as of late, and I feel like I haven't been able to just appreciate it and like have fun with it just because I've been pushing so hard for specific goals. But usually between music and tricking, it's weird. Like they kind of work hand in hand. Like if music is good, then tricking is good, and if tricking is good, then music is good. But when they're both bad, they both suck. Uh,
Mm,
so it's kind of
yeah, I
shitty.
get you.
But something that I do in regards to like just trying to stick with music and stay like productive is I actually invested in an MPC, and that's been
Yeah,
a
I've seen a few
it's
videos.
been a very yeah I did actually shit I did a video for you for your sample pack that you put out on Saturate, which
Oh yeah,
yeah,
that
I put a
was
link to
I
the
love that.
description for Saturate Records, and then also a link to your SoundCloud or your latest EP as well.
Nice.
So you guys
Thank
please do
you.
me a favor and go check that out. He also just put out a premiere. Well, it already premiered, but that's out on YouTube as well. I should have done that at the very beginning because that's usually where people first have all that interest. So I apologize for not doing that sooner.
I don't know.
Um, but having not even just hardware, but something physical to touch. I think in terms of rhythm, usually when it comes to like where my imagination comes from, like beatboxing and stuff, is kind of
Mm,
natural for me. So having the ability to put hands on something that I can naturally like bang out or practice with rhythm and stuff has been a lot of fun for me, and I think has helped me understand a lot more about relationships of rhythm and stuff.
yeah, yeah, just having that human. I mean, I don't know if it's a little Easter egg, but the third track of my Heartless EP is called Neutron, and it was actually named after the Beringer neutron. Um, because it's like a hardware synth.
Mm-hmm.
For the same reason I got that synth was just to be able to tweak and move those knobs manually. And after doing this sort of mud pie concept that I told you
Mm-hmm.
about having this MIDI that goes, and it works so well with hardware gear like that, because I can start that MIDI loop going. I put a tune in one specific place on oscillator A, and then from there on out, I can just play with all the knobs, do post-processing while it's going, and then go back and tweak on a neutron. I just use it as a serum patch, really.
Man, that's so cool that you say that, because that's how I make neurobasses in the MPC. Like, it's got built-in synthesizers and
Yeah,
stuff. And what I do is the exact same thing, where I make the bass line first, right, of the melody or whatever, and then I twist the knobs and do automation over time, because there's not really any modulators. There's a couple, but there's not very many modulators built into the MPC. So there's a
yeah,
physicality aspect to it, and there's a rhythm aspect to it of, all right, hit it here, right, twist it now, or boom, boom, boom,
yeah.
wow. And I have to do that manually, which I would not recommend doing as like your main like source of sound design. But putting yourself back into that sometimes, of almost like primal, right, which seems oxymoronic, I guess, but it's very humanistic. And then you can just bounce out that you can just bounce out that bass line as a thing, and that becomes a chop. So it's, you know, and then you can put that into a drum groove and just trigger that as a chop, and then you can make a variation of it or change the sound with
Yeah,
all the same automation processing. Or you can
yeah,
bounce that out and then do extra layers of processing over it again. It's very time consuming, but at the same time, it's one of those things of like, you have a deep appreciation for it. You know, it's like whittling or like crochet or some shit, where you know it's going to take the time, but like the end result
exactly.
is very amazing.
Honestly, and I think that's the touching on such an important concept there, because you know how I was saying earlier about how this putting the human back into electronic music, and these shortcuts are creating it too inhuman for us. And I think a lot of these things that are time consuming are what people are skipping or finding shortcuts for. But it's these time consuming things that create the uniqueness. And once you're able to consistently do the things that are time consuming, you're suddenly doing things that 90% of the other producers are not doing, and it'll make you stick out much more than if you're just doing everything that's fast, right? Doing a little bit of FM bass on a sine wave and a saw wave, and then adding distortion and noise to it over a drum bass groove. Like, as cool as it is, it's been done a million times before.
Right.
But the moment you start taking your time and doing these kind of time consuming concepts and taking it steps further, you're suddenly tapping into untapped territory, and it becomes very interesting.
And I think that they can coexist, right? And I'm not necessarily
Of
saying like
course.
you have to do hardware, you know, or even necessarily saying like you have to invest in an instrument or something. Like, fuck, like you could do what we used to do at school, is like grab a pen, you know, and sit at a table, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? And just like work on that, but figure out ways that you can capture those ideas. I found that I've started making beats by actually just recording beatboxing into the DAW and then making the beat off of that, because that's what my brain is telling me. So why don't I just use that to my advantage and have that humanistic feel of, I can express it in one way, so why shouldn't I be able to translate that? And
Mm,
you know what I mean, and make that further connection. One of my old
yeah.
friends, which is kind of into a different thing or whatever. And I'm sorry that we're getting all tangential and shit, but you know,
That's cool.
but this is why I like having people like you on here. And I'm sure that when Frequent comes on, I'm just gonna let him talk, because he's got a lot of shit to say. But
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
but something that I think is interesting is my friend brought up this idea about translation theory of when you have something in your head and you have to translate how to get it out, and it's never going to be exactly the same, but like working towards that, and how to like bridge the gap of like expressing almost exactly how it is. And you can do it in terms of audiation through melody, and a lot of times through rhythm. But when it
Mm,
comes into like actual composition that incorporates like sound designs that you haven't even made yet and all that, I think that's part of the beautiful thing of discovery, right? Because you know what
yeah.
chords you're going to use, you know what kind of beat you're going to make, but you don't know what that kick is going to sound like. You don't know what that bass is going to sound like, or you don't know what
Yeah.
that, you know, you don't know how you're going to voice those chords or something.
Yeah. That's that's what's so interesting with electronic music versus the sort of box standard singer songwriter stuff. That we don't write things with the idea that, oh, there's going to be a guitar, there's going to be an acoustic drum kit and a vocal, right? Because the sort of the playing field is so different there. The focus is on such a different area. Whereas we can have like a cool hook, but then it's all about finding a sound that helps emphasize this hook, and then having other sounds like kicks and snares and textures that help emphasize that hook that you've made with that certain sound, and taking it like deep dive into this realm of sound that emphasizes another sound, that all in the end becomes like one package of one big sound.
Right. It's really interesting too, again, of just practicing the imagination part versus the sound design, and at the end the sound design not really even mattering. like like you were talking about, you know, if you have really shitty sounds but amazing composition, then it doesn't
Yeah,
it doesn't matter. But if you're trying to write it in the opposite way, your sound design has to be like freaking pristine in order for you
yeah,
to be taken seriously.
yeah, very much, very much
um
so.
but yeah, man, dude, thank you so much for coming on the channel. Was there anything else that you wanted to, you know, cover? Or I guess, like, do you want to maybe take a few minutes to like see if anybody has any questions or anything, or just catch up with chat?
Yeah, if there are any questions, definitely shoot.
Does
I've,
anybody have any
in the
questions for
meantime, I want
Kunis?
to say
Sorry, bro.
thanks for having me. I mean, I'm so glad I could be on here. Like I said, I used to watch your videos to learn how to produce, so just being on here feels like a huge step. You know, it's just fun. Mm.
Yeah, I really appreciate you coming on and showing some insight for one, but just kind of giving us a little bit of the humanistic side about like what your artistry is about and how you come up with
Mm.
things from a creative personal level, because that's what fascinates me, right? Like you said before, I do like technical stuff, um, and my whole channel is dedicated towards the technical, but I can't give my viewers what you gave to them today, right? Because that came from you as an individual. That being
So,
said, you are always welcome to come back on the channel. So if you got a new release coming out, you want to talk about it sometime, or if you want to come on the stream and just, you know, if you want to do another stream in the future and actually show us some production stuff, like, I'm more than open
yeah,
to
no,
that.
I'd be super happy. I could do a whole thing about that sort of melodic. I call it melodic mud pies.
Yeah,
Um,
that would be awesome, man.
I'd love to show that.
And I think that would also be cool to kind of just have that discussion, because I know I don't think that our process is the same by any means, but I'm familiar with it, and I think that would be cool to maybe just talk about that and maybe take some ideas and stuff and kind of,
Mm.
you know, mix and match with it. But yeah, we're all here to learn, is what Artifact says, and I totally
Yeah.
agree. And like I said, I just feel honored to be able to have somebody that's, you know, in a good place with music and a good mindset, and, you know, somebody who's really kind to come on the channel and just have this kind of discussion.
No, awesome. Well, thanks for everyone in the chat. It was nice to see it
Yeah,
active and people talking.
yeah, sorry, dude. Thank you all. Kunis, thank you so much. Do you want to tell us about where is the best place to grab your latest EP? I have Saturate website pulled up right now. You
Yeah,
can go.
so best place like Bandcamp if you want to buy it, but just streaming it, just go for SoundCloud. Um, I can put a link in the description myself.
Yeah, can you send me a link via chat to your Bandcamp, and then I'm gonna put it both in the description and in chat. And you guys, like, I know that we had a huge talk about like philosophical stuff with music and stuff, but like, this will make so much more sense if you actually go and listen to his EP and you listen to the context, right? Like, it's almost like going to a sermon of, like, you know, church or some shit and hearing people talk about it but not reading the Bible, right? Or something like that. I don't know, that was a bad example, but
It makes sense.
yeah, hopefully it makes sense. But yeah, go listen to his music and check him out and follow him, and you know, leave a comment on his SoundCloud and stuff, and all that. Like, give him some interaction, because that's this word of mouth, this networking system is how we help each other grow as artists. And that's why I always want to be somebody that you feel like, you know, is going to be on your team. Your success is my success.
Mm. Yeah,
You
exactly. We all grow. It's like these circles, these nice circles that grow together. And
cool.
eventually, see, I'm gonna get you my Bandcamp eventually. I noticed that the Saturate EP hasn't been linked to it yet, so it's still just on the Saturate Bandcamp. I can link that as well.
That's fine. Yeah, I have your SoundCloud link in already, but what's it called? I'm gonna leave this video public, of course, but whenever that's ready, no rush. I'll just go and add it to the description there.
That's cool.
Philippe has a question. He says, Kunis, what's your biggest inspiration for minimalistic bass music? Can it be an artist or just a concept?
Ooh, biggest inspiration. Okay. I want to say, Saruda actually. I think he was the one that made me realize that I could go minimal, um, and keep it crazy, crazy hard. He was like my first like find in that realm of things. But wait, let me read the question again. What's your biggest inspiration from minimalism-based music? Can be an artist or just a concept? But yeah, honestly, I think it's more of a concept. It's the idea of I don't like sounds overlap. I like the idea of having a clean mix down in a result. So so at the end of my track, I want it to be really easy for me to mix and make sound. Like every part of the frequency spectrum is used, but very cautiously. So each element only is there for a reason, and that way I think I designed my sounds in the first place to only be in certain frequencies and only fill up certain space, and that's more just a concept. So yeah, just very selective of what sound I like. um just gives that clean mix down at the end, which then in my head becomes a minimalistic mix down.
You gave us some really good insight earlier in the interview about like the subtleties of like panning and stuff, but do you have any kind of like quick fire tips or anything that you've found success in that helped really like, make your mix go from like this is good to okay, now this is something way different that I should pay more attention to?
mm, um Honestly, looking after your low end, and in my own mix downs, I know I'm pretty touchy about my top end. I'm a huge fan of a very minimalistic top end. Um, so I like keeping them pretty clean and subtle, and as in trying to use as few elements. Again, I'm repeating myself, but I think that's what it is trying to use as few elements as possible to do the jobs necessary. Oh, I remember one. Um, this is more of a concept. A lot of people mix as loud as possible, and for bass music, it's a very common thought to mix as loud as possible. But what I found in my own music is that I'm a huge fan of mixing as quiet as possible, where every element in my mixdown is only as loud as it has to be to do its job, right? So what I do whenever I'm mixing any element in, um, especially on the final mixdown, but this I do this while doing my songwriting as well. But then I usually redo it again for the mixdown stage, or the like gain staging, where
Mm-hmm.
I'll take each element or crank it up till it's too loud, so then I can hear what it's like when it's loud, and then I'll take it down to when it's too quiet, and then over a little bit I'll just like crank and push it up, push it up, push it up, and just till I just hear it, right? Until I'm like, now it's doing what I want it to do, right? It could be 10 dB louder and still do what I want it to do and still not sound too loud, but keeping it at that sort of threshold where if it was any quieter, it just wouldn't even be audible really. But then I push it up that slightly little bit more, just so it comes over that threshold. And then I keep all my elements there. So most of my tracks are like minus 40 dB, minus 38. Some of them are at minus 20, and the loudest things are very rarely over minus 10. Um, and that way I've sort of create this really quiet but in my head balanced and clean mix down. And then once you've finished that, I bounce out all the stems, and then you can crank them up a little bit and then start your mastering process and make it loud. But remember, mixing is not where you make things loud. The mastering is where you make things loud. unless you want to go for like this -4 LUFS kind of music in dubstep, where you basically just have to then saturate each group and make sure each stem is as loud as possible is before it goes to mastering.
What? I never do that. What? Come on. I have the cleanest mixes ever.
That's just my take on
No.
it. That's how I found my mixdowns became much cleaner when I started mixing as quiet as possible.
I think that's a really, really good approach, and I think that for the next couple of tracks, I might even just give that a shot. My mixes
See
are
what happens.
notorious for like seemingly on an EQ having a lot of high end, but still sounding hella muffled, and that might be something that I can use to solve that issue. I think I didn't we talk about that a couple
Yeah,
of
we did
times.
have a discussion about it. It got me thinking about it because I hadn't thought about it too much before we last talked about it.
Yeah,
Mm.
even on my last, even on well my album release on all that, like all of those tunes just sound hella dark and like hella flat. And so I think maybe perhaps by trying to not have so much high end on all of my stuff as well, and not so much intermodular distortion of like cranking the low end, it might, you know, might be able to remedy some of those problems. But that's definitely something that I'll be keeping in mind and taking with me. And there's a lot of stuff that I will be referencing in this interview that we touched on that are definitely worth coming back to.
Yeah, and there's topics that I've touched on that I would love to delve into deeper. We can we can talk other times for
Yeah,
sure.
absolutely, man. I really appreciate it. Philippe says, how often do you keep track of levels for different streaming platforms?
Yeah, so honestly, I never considered different streaming platforms, because at the end of it, streaming platforms are gonna do what they do, right? They're gonna quiet or make your stuff louder. A good mixdown, slash a good master. Um, I just want to say like this is when getting your stuff signed is so beautiful because then you actually get really good mastering done for it. But you can also just pay for it. Um, but basically, as long as your music is above like -14 LUFS, you're good to go. And considering the mixdown's good because a song that's mastered at -13 LUFS and a song that's mastered at -3 LUFS are end up going to be pushed down to -14 LUFS anyway, and a down compression is literally just them turning the volume down. So if the mixdown is done in a good balanced way for commercial, what's the word, average, no, standpoint, no,
Mm-hmm.
uh, you get what I'm saying, then this keeping your levels at that point is like not so relevant, and I would more say just make your song sound good. Industry standard, thank you, that's the word I was looking for.
Well, here's an
But
interesting
yeah,
question. What about
uh
when you send demos to labels?
see, and when you okay, and that's different, yes. So when
Yeah.
you're sending them to labels, then you want it to be loud because then you're competing next to the other people around you. And okay, well, actually, depends if you send it as an MP3 file or if you send it as a SoundCloud link, that is not downloadable. But most likely they're going to download the tunes, because they have their softwares that they listen to all through. But you want to master it. You want, the end of the day, you want your track to sound as good as possible. And again, this is all from my standpoint where I'm trying to just make my own music rather than it
Right.
trying to sort of fit into a genre box or niche. But I try to make my music sound as good as possible. I master it as loud as I can before it starts worsening the quality of it, right? I'll push it as loud as I can using all the skills that I have, trying to make it sound as good as possible, but it still sounds better when someone else masters it afterwards. But doesn't mean that my master didn't do it any better than not mastering it in the first place.
Right.
Um, so you want to push things. You want it to be loud because obviously this loudness is perceived better, and that's the funny thing. They all say, "Oh, it's perceived better," but if it's perceived better, it just is better. No, what's the difference in if it's perceived better or if it actually is better? Because
Right. If you think it's better, then it's better. Right.
exactly
Yeah.
right. What's the question then? Like it's weird like that. But so yeah, just push it, right? But a clean mixdown can be pushed so loud, and if it starts distorting at like -8 LUFS, then you've probably got a mixdown issue.
Right.
Um, then you should go back and revisit the mix fix your low end, because your low end will probably distort quick, or hi-hats, and the high end like that. The high end gets really harsh if it's too loud and starts distorting. The low end will just distort your whole mix. So
Yeah.
if you get that nice balance, you end up realizing that you can push it so much further than you ever thought you could. But then just tone it back and just be critical and listen to it in like a way where you can be like, cool, this sounds nice. I always aim for like -6 LUFS when I'm doing my self masters. I just feel like it's like a nice balance. But if it goes -3 or -8 and it sounds better that way, then that's yeah, exactly. Artifacts. Pushing it loud will often reveal mixdown issues, and that's what I'm saying. Like, go back into your mix and fix that, because yeah, you'll hear things that start distorting before everything else, and things shouldn't be distorting way before everything else. Something will obviously distort first because you need something in the front of your mix,
But minimizing the
yeah,
threshold is what you're going
yeah,
for, right? Because if it's
exactly.
if one thing starts to distort and you push it a little higher and everything distorts, then you're getting closer. But if you like push it and one thing starts distorting and then it doesn't do anything else to any of the other sounds, then you know, like, you know what I mean, your sub is too loud, or you know,
Yeah,
your kick is too resonant in the low end, or I don't know. Those are some common problems
exactly.
I run into.
There is something. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
exactly.
exactly. Nah, those are some excellent tips and stuff though, and I would love to kind of chat with you some more about like mixing things and whatnot. That's a big area that I feel like I can improve on, especially because I think that mixing becomes more important if you are a techie sound designer trying to make cool music. Because, like we said before, like if you're gonna go that route, you really have to make sure that your shit sounds good. You know, it can't just be like, oh, look at
Yeah.
this experiment. That's great, right? They're gonna be like, what the fuck is that? You know, but if you have
Yeah.
this one bass and a kick and snare and it has this amazing pristine texture that's like nice and wide and like has tons of movement, but you can like make the movement prominent, production
Yeah.
value, right?
Yeah.
Then those are things that you can achieve and make something sound more compelling. But again, balance and keys and stuff though. Um,
Yeah, I think mixes are underappreciated by a lot of new producers, because I personally have so many old demos that would be so nice to have mixed properly, but I don't have the project files for them anymore, and the mixes are just not good, and therefore the tracks will just never see the sunlight. Um,
but still,
which is sad. If I would have been if I would have learned to mix earlier on, I would have had releasable music earlier on, I feel.
I mean, I guess that maybe I'll leave you with this because I don't want to take up too much of your time. But how do you
Yeah.
feel like now that you are signed to? Are you signed to anywhere else other than Saturate?
I've had a Ram record release, and I've had a few Sound Museum releases, and I've
Awesome.
got a Bristol label called Transparent Audio, who's very eager for some of my stuff.
That's awesome. Yeah, I just wanted to know personally, just about you as an artist. But
Yeah.
now that you are signed with labels, how do you feel about like self-releasing music? Does everything like that you want to quote unquote release have to be part of that because you feel like it has to match with the brand, or like do you feel like that put you in a hard spot, or
Mm, no, at the end of it, I still self-release stuff, and um I don't know. I feel like self-releasing would be fine as well. The main benefits of label releases are really that you just get a slightly bigger reach,
right?
but realizing that their reach isn't everything, right? Your reach still counts for something as well, and you get this third person opinion or second person opinion. And honestly, like Thomas just reaching out to me and explaining how much he likes my music was a big like confidence booster, because the stuff that he signed for Saturate is very much my personal music.
Mm-hmm.
The stuff that I've made just for myself, well, to show myself that I can do sort of the experimental side, and having someone of um of importance basically saying that this music's sick, it's a huge confidence boost. But I
And
would not be afraid to self-release still. I've still got a few self-release tunes that have done relatively well. Um, and I still think it's fun to self-release. And I've talked with my flatmate a lot about this, because he makes really interesting music and it's all bass music, but we find a hard time finding a label that would suit his style. But it's not because his music isn't good. It's his music's just different,
It's niche, yeah.
and therefore like everyone will have their way. There's so many ways you can go about releasing music, and being signed is definitely not the only way to become successful. Right, you can go about it so many ways, and having this mixed match of self releases and label releases is probably the way I'll be going forward. Whenever I make more experimental weird stuff, or maybe a self release, and then every now and then I'll make something that's a bit more commercial viable, and then I'll be like, cool, this one someone will want to sign.
Right. And it's important to like maintain ownership of your artistry and remember to
Yeah,
make music because you like making music.
exactly.
And that's kind of how I felt. I submitted Eclipse to Saturate, and I was really fortunate because Tomas liked one of the tunes, and I kind of had to make this call or something where I was like, okay, well, he'll take one, which I mean, to be honest, how honored, like how much of an honor is that, right? And I'm sure you
Mm,
know, right? Because like you got signed with them,
yeah.
and like how much of an honor is that? And then I'm like, damn, like I didn't know what to do because how could I turn this down? But at the same time, like I made a body of work, like you said, that I was like,
Mm,
I have to go with that together. And so I went with my gut feeling, and I tried to like decline it as respectful as possible in hopes that I'll make something else even better for them that fits the label even better.
mm,
But
yeah.
you know what I mean? But at the end of
Obviously
the,
you will, right? You're just progressing, and
yeah,
that's
yeah,
the main thing.
exactly. And like I said, like, that's one of those things that, if anything, it motivated me to want to make better music that was closer to what the label represented, and really go in that direction. But sometimes you have to figure out like where you are and where you sit as an artist and what you're willing to do and what you're not willing to do. And it doesn't have to be out of malice, or like it doesn't have to be like a bridge burn or anything, or at least I don't feel that way. But
Yeah.
you kind of have to make those decisions, and I guess I went with it. And there's still a part of me that I'm like, fuck, man, I should have done that. But even still, you know what I'm saying? Like I did what I did
Yeah,
because
yeah, yeah.
I'm still an artist
And
at the end of the day.
there's going to be so many times you're like, "Fuck, why did I do that? Or I should
Yeah,
have done this."
and
Right, and that's part of the journey, right?
right,
And eventually things will. I'm a firm believer of like if you stick at it and you actually try, and you have your goals. Like, I mean, obviously you keep them within some form of reality check, but things will happen for a reason, and all the negative things that happen within reason, they tend to have some form of positive outcome if you just keep going at it. There'll be
right.
a reason for it, and you can make the best out of it.
And keep making tunes, like, and don't get complacent
Exactly.
as well. Like if you are signing and stuff, that's something that Frequent and I are going to be talking about on Wednesday, is like, don't be complacent. If anything, that was a huge motivator to be like, okay, he liked one tune. I want to send him an EP that he's going to like all of them. You know what I mean? I want to send him
Yeah,
something, or send somebody
yeah,
something to where like I'm not going to be a one hit wonder type. You know what I'm saying?
yeah,
Like,
yeah. Exactly.
call it
Yeah.
ego, call it
So,
what you want, but that's, yeah.
yeah. Nah, but it's just I think hard work is where it shines, and just keep at it, and do what you want to do, and
Yeah.
something should work out as
And
long as you go about it with a realistic manner.
And I'd also say too, like, if you are up and coming, or, if you all are part of my channel, hopefully you feel like, you can always come and talk to me about stuff, or like the Discord or whatever, but like put yourself into a community where people are better than you. Put yourself and surround yourself with like-minded producers. And now online is
Mm,
even, it makes that even easier, but find yourself around the people that make the music that you want to make, and get what you can, and be a good person, and try to make real relationships. Because to be honest, like, I know that we were talking about labels and stuff, and that's a part of the music industry and shit, but throw that out of the way. Like, if you were to be doing a self-release anyways, without the label or anything, I still want to have you on the channel because of who you are, and because you
mm,
are passionate about music, and you have, I, I will say this might sound shallow, but it's a lot easier for me to have an interview with somebody that's on a similar technical level that we can have deeper conversations, as opposed to like, hey, I just started music last week. And that's why I don't do it with everybody.
Yeah, yeah,
But, that being said, it doesn't matter. Like, I would much rather care about the personal relationship than anything. And if you put that
of
into
course.
your industry and your community, then the benefits that you are going to take away are going to matter so much more than trying to get ahead in like trying to quote
Yeah,
unquote make it in music.
of course. There's so the friends you make along the way. Some of them stay and some of them disappear, but eventually you build up these circles of people that are important to you, and you suddenly realize that every release you put out, if it was released by a label or if it was released by yourself, right? The majority of the reposts and the likes and the shares and the comments are the same people, right? So it had very little to do with who released it or when it was released or why it was released, but these sort of circles of friends and people who are important to you, they stay, and I think that's exactly, I think community is like where it's at. And
Yeah.
but that's why I love Saturate, right? Because within Saturate, it's such a nice community. It's not this commercial. Like I said, I had a Ram record release. I've never spoken, like, it was on a compilation, but I've never spoken to any of the other guys that were on that record. I've had no contact with any of the other people from Ram Records since then. And it sort of just died away. While it was Saturate, everyone I've met since I even joined the Discord server is so supportive. Every release I've had between them, they've been on every track, right? They've talked about it. They've messaged me being like, "I love this. It's so good." Um,
Yeah.
my self releases have been reposted and liked, and it's like that's I don't care that my RAM record got more plays, right? It didn't give me any fulfillment. Whereas these, yeah, so
Yeah.
community, everything.
I really cannot say enough good things about the Saturate community, and I talk about you all a lot, in good light, of
Yes.
course. But I talk about you all a lot because all of my experiences have been the exact same. I mean, it's one thing to have like a big name producer or something like pop in your chat or whatever, or be like, hey, good job on a comment on SoundCloud. But like when they normally come into your stream and they're like, what are you doing? You know what I mean? And they've usually have other people with them, like you come in sometimes Aiden comes in, and I pop into their streams, I come into the Saturate stuff and all that. It's like, it is about the music because that's like the core or the theme about what the community is based off of. But
Mm,
I feel like I've made friends. I feel like I've
yeah.
gotten into a means that people can share open ideas and have a safe space to be like, yo, we're all trying to work towards the same goal. And it's not about making dollars. It's
Yeah.
about how do we get better at making tunes.
Yeah, yeah. I've there's just a little joke. Well, when I released Heartless, there was a magazine called Headbang Society who wanted to write a little article about it, and one of their interview question was, how do you seem like someone who works a lot of music. How do you separate your music life with your everyday life? I just had my head like, wait, what do you mean?
Yeah, it's the same thing.
My music life is the same thing,
Yeah.
exactly. My friends are music people, and so it's just one hand in hand. But I think
Yeah.
that's what makes it fun. You just have this long circle of you get better, some of your friends are better as well. You work on tunes together, or you send each other some demos, and you're like, wow, that's
Yeah.
sick.
And you get
How did you do that? And you learn.
and when you have the ability to have like real ideas exchange as opposed to like, yo, your snare sucks, or oh, this was cool, I mean, anybody
Yeah,
that's outside of the music production community, it's so fucking hard for me to even get them to listen to anything,
yeah,
like I'm not gonna name anybody specific or anything, but I'll send it out and be like, yo, check out this or something, and like it's got zero interactivity, even though
yeah,
like the people that I send it to are people that I know personally, right? But
yeah,
when you have a community like that, and that's why I think that like having like a feedback channel or something in your Discord is incredibly helpful and stuff too, is that even though I'm the person that's running the community, as far as my community, what people are doing in the critique and request is they're learning about each other's music and they're having their own conversations, their own personal messages exchanged, their own ideas,
Mm,
their own shit that they're doing and building off of each other and networking, and sometimes like getting into collaboration and stuff.
yeah.
Isn't that how Flesh Interface got together? Like, I
Yeah, yeah,
believe
they
that.
met in a feedback stream.
Yeah, like those guys never even
Exactly.
met. Yeah,
Yeah, I know one's in America, one's in Germany, and they work together.
that's incredible, man. That's like one of the. That's almost like, a success story of like, I don't know, like when you hear about people like discovering each other from across the world or something or some shit like that. And it's I want to continue to let that thrive and have a positive space for, people of every single caliber, whether you're a beginner or intermediate or advanced or professional or whatever gamut that lies in.
Mm,
I learned the absolute most
yeah.
about music production when I started doing YouTube and making educational videos, doing something that makes you learn. Absolutely, 100%. YouTube did not bring people to my music, but it did bring me to other people. I'll say that for sure. And
Mm.
that's been one of the most rewarding things and why I still like making videos. Um,
Yeah, no, you've always been on the grind. I've respected that.
Bro, you want to talk about grind? Like, how long has Artifacts been making
Uh,
videos?
oh yeah, that as well. I remember watching Artifacts back. Oh, mate, when I started making drum and bass, I swear this was first year of uni, so it was 4 years ago. And one of your videos, Artifacts, you were talking about like this crazy neuro bass that you made. I don't know. This was about the beginning of my sound design journey. And I remember seeing you make a respace, and then you put like 10 Ableton stock plugins after it, right? All within reason. And I remember literally copying this bass,
Yeah.
being like, how do I do it? And I made it. And I made my first drum bass tune. And I went to all my mates. This was first year of uni, being like, "Hey guys, I made my first drum bass tune. My first drum bass tune. I've made them wear their earplugs." And I went, "How do you make that bass?" I said, "I made that bass in Ableton." And then, yeah,
See,
it was
like,
funny. You know, I was doing artifacts.
isn't that such like a that's such a cool thing too, and somebody someday, most likely somebody's going to tell you that as well. They're going to be like, yo, Kunis, I listened to your tune and that inspired me to do this or do that. And I get lucky a lot, and it feels really good to hear people be like, yo, like even for you, right? You were like, yo, I watched your comprehensive guide to neurobase and shit. And I'm like, yo, what? Like, I'm
Yeah,
looking up to you guys. Like, what the fuck? So
yeah. I
it's,
guess in circles, you know.
yeah, exactly.
Everyone knows things that other people don't know. And that's what's crazy about it, right?
It's yeah it keeps giving back, and as long as this community is in a positive light, then I'm always going to want to try to invest in the community and bring people like you on the channel and just try to elevate each other, because to me that's what it's about.
Mm,
But
yeah, definitely.
yeah,
I
Felipe.
see there's a last question from Felipe.
Yeah, one more question, and then we could wrap it up if you like. When did you feel like you finally hit good enough for release, Mark? How long did it take you to achieve that, like on a consistent basis, and what did you change that helped you get to that?
Yeah, so I had this. I don't know if you guys. Oh, what was it called? There's this podcast, Nation. I don't know if you guys have heard of Nation.
Was
Back
that
in the day,
AU5 and those
that
guys?
was with yeah. So AU5 joined it eventually, but the guy who was rolling it was like Wyatt Troy or something like that.
Yeah.
Anyway, he had someone on his stream, or it was just one of his random podcast episodes where, yeah, Wyatt Troy, yeah, a multiplier, yeah. Um, so they had, so Wyatt was talking about, he had a guy on there, oh, I can't even remember the name of who he had on there, but point being is he had this philosophy that 10 tracks, once you have 10 tracks that you think are releasable, um, that's when you can start releasing music. And the way I looked at this, because obviously you go through these stages, right? You make a few tracks and you think they're amazing. And then a month later, you listen back to them and you're like, well, they're trash.
Hmm.
Why did I think they were amazing? And then, but slowly, like that gap of looking back, the gap gets larger and larger. And I was explaining earlier how long it takes me to make a piece of music. So that for the longest time, it was like each track. by the time I finished my next track, the previous track I made just wasn't cutting it. Sometimes I got 2 tracks in, 3 tracks in if I felt lucky.
Yeah.
And then by the time I got that far, I was like, now those tracks are trash again. So I gave myself that rule where I was gonna have at least 10 tracks in my back catalog that I'm happy with before I start releasing music. And I had to be cruel to myself, right? This wasn't me being like, oh, it could work.
Yeah,
It could be cool. It's like,
that's
no, no,
hard.
no, no. If I'm not proud of it and I want to go and show everyone I know, I'm not counting it as a track. And then over time, I actually, like, 3 years into production, I still hadn't started releasing. And this is when I was close to giving up on this rule because I was like, I'm never gonna release. And then I indirectly gave up on the rule, and then I just started making music. And another year went by and I hadn't released anything. And then I started listening back to my music, and then I suddenly had this list of, I don't know, like 12, 13 tracks that I was actually genuinely happy with. Some which I'd created before that 10-year mark. Doesn't mean it was 10 in a row that I
Right.
was happy
Yeah.
with. It was just a catalog of 10 tracks that I was happy with. And then suddenly I was like, you know what, this is sick. And it was at around that same point that I had those 10 tracks is when I started making Heartless. So it all sort of just came together as this package, being like, cool, I've got 10 tracks of slightly different genres, different styles that I like, which I'm going to release before Heartless. And then I'm going to drop Heartless, which is the point where I'm now, cool, I know I can make music that I like. Now let's see what happens if I use this skill set to just make music
For
without.
you. Yeah.
Exactly.
That's awesome, man. And I think that, I think that it's really what I think the biggest takeaway that I got from that was understanding that like having a goal is good, but understanding that when you make a plan, plans change, and
Mm,
not forgetting what, like when you make goals like that, you can't, like you have to be in such tune with yourself to remember that you are trying to make 10 tracks that you like, but you can't forget that you're trying to make music because you like making music. And it's really easy
yeah.
to let go of that. It's really easy to forget about what it's all about because your goals and those orientation things change. So it's cool to see like how you had a growth process through that and how you inadvertently almost came up with the result that you wanted in the first place, right?
Yeah, exactly. I was, yeah, I thought it was fun when I sort of came back around like that. Um, so I'm glad I made that rule because it stopped me in the beginning from just releasing a lot of trash. Um, but then later I was really happy that I sort of naturally came towards um, that goal without it even being direct. It was like subconscious, I guess. It was just there.
Yeah, it's awesome,
In the
man.
bag.
Well, Kunis, dude, I had such a good time chatting with you. Please, if
Yeah,
you ever
me
want to
too,
come
man.
back on, man, like you're more than welcome to do that. Or maybe something that could be cool is getting people on a group chat and just letting you all speak and talk and joke and stuff in the way that we always
Mm,
do, because I think that would be really awesome as well.
yeah,
To
I'd
kind
love
of,
to get more dirty with the hands, do some more
yeah,
technical stuff.
yeah,
So
maybe
I love that stuff.
if you can stick around for maybe just 1 or 2 minutes after I cut the stream, and maybe we can talk about what's to happen in the future. But before we do that, you guys check the description, check the chat just a little bit above. Please do us a favor and go listen to his music. Go cop his EP and just listen to everything that Saturate has to offer, anyways. Or you know, just listen
Mm.
to his music. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
That's why we're doing this, right? Is because this is all a matter of like, it's a celebration of somebody releasing something that's important and whatnot. And I think that I wish I could do this for everybody. I wish I could do this for every single person,
Right.
because I think
Mm.
that it would really help in like growing the awareness aspect and growing the community. But yo, thank you so much. Is there anything that you want to leave us with, or anything that you want to tell us about that's happening in the near future, or anything of the sort?
No, I've just had just a heartless release, man. It's the beginning of something. There's lots of sick stuff to come, but it's all in the works. Um, yeah. I mean, obviously, come to me with any questions. I'm trying to set up like a lesson, like a mentoring one-to-one sessions, because when it comes to it, like, that's what I want to do. That's why I'm doing my masters, so that I can become a lecturer. I would love to just teach production, talk production. So any questions, just come to me. I'd love to talk about that stuff.
Yeah, and I
Um,
guess back to you, Kunis, like if you ever want to chat about like content creation and stuff, or like you want to try to look at that as a platform or something, I'd be happy to share with you what I know. I wouldn't consider
cool.
myself to be a blueprint, but I'm somebody that's been kind of, well, like you said, hammering away at content
Yeah,
stuff. So I'm happy to tell you
yeah,
what
yeah,
what worked
definitely.
for me and what didn't work. But
Nice.
yeah, dude, thank you again so much. I really appreciate having you on. Zane just came in at the end of the stream, but we'll maybe one
Hey,
day I'll bring you both of you on, or you and Cage and Box Kitty and Flesh, and like that would be fucking awesome. But we're all over the planet, so that might be a little
yeah,
bit.
shout out to Zane,
Yeah, shout out
best
to
guy
Zane.
from Saturate. Yeah,
You guys are awesome, and I have nothing but respect and admiration for you all. And for you in the chat, thank you guys so much for joining us today. I really appreciate that we had a good turnout. That you know what I mean, just have you here and available. You could be anywhere else watching anything else, and the fact that you chose to tune in on this interview means a lot to me, and I'm sure it means a lot to Kunis. So,
oh yeah,
but yeah, I guess that's it for you all. Stick around for just a couple minutes, and then I'll chat with you about what you want to do in the future. But for the
sick.
rest of you all, thank you so much, and I will see you all with Frequent on Wednesday. Bye, everybody.
Mad.
Yo, dude, thank you so much